And on Book TV. Bell Hooks is a writer, professor, and cultural critic. She's the author of over 20 books on topics ranging from feminism in Ain't I a Woman and feminist theory from margin to center, to racism with Killing Rage, and class in Where We Stand. Bell Hooks has also written books for children, including Happy to be Nappy. The recently published Communion is her third inquiry into the meaning of love. And for the next 3 hours, Bell Hooks will be taking your phone calls and emails as our guest on Book TV's In Depth.
Bell Hooks, I want to go all the way back to the very first sentence you wrote in the very first book you got published, 1989. This is what you wrote. At a time in American history when black women in every area of the country might have joined together to demand social equality for women and a recognition of the impact of sexism on our social status, we are, by and large, silent. Is that true 13 years later?
Absolutely not. We have found our voice.
And how have you found it?
Well, a lot of it has to do with people like Bell Hooks, Michelle Wallace, lots of people who help people to recognize that we didn't have to remain silent. Audre Lorde, Pat Parker. I mean, Audre Lorde's incredible poem where she told us that, you know, we may be afraid to speak, but if we're silent, we're still afraid. We have to speak. We see all the writing coming out of those early years of feminism from black women, often focused on the question of having a voice. You know, Angela Davis coming into voice as a person speaking on behalf of ending sexism. It was almost like a kind of groundswell of, not unlike, you know, what Maya Angelou describes in her I Know Why the Caged Bird Sings, when she begins to find the words to say what she needs to say. And that's happened, and now we've got to say more and differently. But we're certainly having our say.
How many of your most recent books have been about love? Three?
Three. I'm the high priestess of love, and now my new children's book on love will come out in a few months. But
so you've gone from 1989 to a book about feminism to 2002 now to books about love in the last couple ones. Where are we moving in there? How has this transition happened, or is there a transition?
I'm always organically moving with the culture as a whole, in the sense that, you know, the themes that are coming up both in my life, among the students that I teach, among the neighbors that I talk to, and partially, you know, the question of love kept coming up in lots of ways. I'm single, my own search for love, my hope to find love and partnership, the struggles with my ex-boyfriend that sort of, you know, inspired the first All About Love book, and, you know, the obsession with love I've had for a long time. Like many writers, I often hold an obsession for a long time, and then I began to write about it, to explore it.
What do you mean, an obsession?
Well, you know, something that has obsessed you since you were a kid, or like, I mean, All About Love, New Visions begins with me talking about how I felt about love as a child, and how that thinking about love sort of, you know, like a little thread woven through your life. I think all of us have those threads that are woven through our lives, and you know, James Hillman, the wonderful Jungian psychoanalyst, has written a lot about life maps, and how there's a real different life map for people who know what they want to be in childhood. And I think because I decided as a child that I wanted to be a writer, holding on to those threads and those obsessions and seeing them grow has been very much a part of making me who I am.
I'm looking for this, the book on where you talked about waiting for the decision on whether you were going to get tenure at Oberlin College. Do you remember which book you wrote about that in?
That's a hard one, Connie. I mean,
yeah, I know I have it here, but I'm asking the question because you said you knew for a long time that you wanted to be a writer, and yet you talk in that book about how waiting for the decision of whether you were going to get the tenure and the reaction that you had after you found out you got tenure, and how your sister talked to you about it. You want to tell that story?
I can't tell that story, Connie, because all of a sudden I can't remember it. I mean, this is one of the hazards of having written more than 20 books, is that things come and go in terms of how I felt about it, but I know that for me, when I was about to get tenure, I felt really trapped, and I've been struggling for a long time with the question of how free can we be as writers in this nation when we're in institutions. And so that's an ongoing, another ongoing question, issue for me. How much, when you're in an institution, does it silence you? Does it frame the nature of your voice and what you say? And that has always been something that has haunted me. And of course now I teach a very small amount, so I can be free to write whatever in the times that I'm not teaching.
Let me refresh your memory. I found it. It's in teaching.
Oh, good.
It's in teaching to transgress.
Yes.
Yeah, it's this book right here. But I'm going to have to open it because I got to read. In the weeks before the English department at Oberlin College was about to decide whether or not I would be granted tenure, I was haunted by dreams of running away, of disappearing, yes, of even of dying. These dreams were not a response to fear that I would not get granted tenure. They were a response to the reality that I would be granted tenure. You go on to talk about the fact that teaching was one of the 3 things that your mother would have accepted for a black girl to become, and that your sister tried to tell you that this was why you were really turning your back on teaching.
Right, because I was never meant to be a teacher, but a Southern black girl, I think that's really the point, because I think that particularly in the South of the 50s and the South of my mother's girlhood, you know, a black female could, especially from a working class background, could either be domestic worker or a teacher, but there wasn't a lot in between. And what my sister told me reminded me, and that's why it's so great to have sisters, of which I have 5, is that, you know, I never really wanted to be a teacher. And it's been an interesting thing because I've been such a exciting and good teacher, and yet it hasn't been what I initially thought as my central vocation.
Here she is, folks. What age?
49.
49 now. You'll be 50 in September.
Yes.
And how old were you when this picture was taken?
Oh,
the teeny tiny one.
That's me. What? Maybe 9 months.
Maybe. Yeah.
Yeah. That bald-headed, cute baby.
Where were you? Where did you go?
Sitting on Mama's bed in Hopkinsville, Kentucky.
What was it like growing up in Hopkinsville?
Well, you know, I think that there was something really special about growing up in, you know, Hopkinsville, Kentucky. I consider myself a Southerner. And part of what I like about growing up in a small town where you were known, and in our town, you know, a segregated black world where many black people were achievers, is that whole sense of having a sort of central relationship to the environment. I write a lot about the sensory landscape of my growing up. You know, vegetables, Mama's cooking, my grandmother's house, all of those things that were so deep. And I live part of the time now in New York City and in the South, and I'm reminded of that on hot, humid days where you feel that you can taste and smell, you know, the world around you, the kind of South that Toni Morrison writes about in The Bluest Eye, having an effect on your senses and your capacity to experience color.
Who are these people, if you look up there?
That is Bell Hooks, my mother's mother's mother. And people forget, and then there's my grandfather.
This is your grandfather here?
Daddy Gus, whom I write about in Bone Black. I say, his smells fill my nostrils with the scent of happiness. With him, all the broken bits and pieces of my heart come together again. My very, very, very favorite person from childhood, Daddy Gus, my mother's father.
And the woman you were named after?
Yes. Well, you know, Bell Hooks is a pseudonym, and it's more that, in fact, as a child, when I would speak harshly back to adults, talk back, they would say to me, "You must be Bell Hooks's granddaughter," you know. And that sense, you know, I've written so much about that sense of coming from a legacy of outspoken women, because certainly my mother's mother was a very outspoken woman, and that sense of that being a natural part of who I am.
How old were you here?
Oh, there I'm in my 20s. I think I'm about 25 or 26.
And you chose this as the cover for one of your books.
I chose that as the cover for one of my books because it was around the time that I was writing that book, and it's a retrospective it was a reissue of a Bell Hooks classic, is what they called it, Feminist Theory from Margin to Center. And, I've always liked that picture because of the dreamy-eyed nature of it. Here I was writing this sort of hard-hitting, provocative, feminist theory, but for me it was all about dreaming. I often have seen myself as almost, like a scientist in a lab. I'm very much a fan of Madame Curie and of the way that she worked, and I've always studied the biographies of women who do exceptional things, and so I like that photo because it has that dreamy element, and of course it has the militant Afro look that I was so into in those times. And so it took me a long time to want to be on the cover of books, to have a photo of me, but I liked having that cover with the eyes.
Now, tell me about your hair. Does your hair, I want to say, mirror you? Because you've written about Happy to be Nappy. I mean, how does your hair change over the years reflected you, I guess?
I think my hair changes, just really reflects the moods of the moment. I tried to bring a photo of my sister Angela, who is the person who braids my hair most often, and she braided it for the show today, and I said to her, I wish that I had a photo because she's such a wonderful braider. And for me, hair is about loving ourselves just the way we are. When I signed the book, Happy to be Nappy, my first published children's book, I always sign it to loving yourself just the way you are.
I'll show our viewers a copy of it. Here's the cover of it.
Tons of money, Black Americans, all Americans, trying to change ourselves, especially females, often to be something other than what we are. So, for me, it's been a great thing in life to be able to enjoy having natural hair in different shapes and different styles, and to see, little children having that sensations through reading Happy to be Nappy.
Do you remember when you wrote this, or this was your first published children's book, you said?
Right.
But that implies that you had written other children's books before.
I had written other children's books before. Happy to be Nappy just sort of came to me, out of nowhere. It starts, my mother, Miss Rosabelle, is a wonderful cook. And just the other day I called her, and she was making the fried pies that she used to make, in our girlhood, that we would come home from school and there'd be these incredible smells coming from the kitchen, and Mom would, call us her girl pie. So that one of the things that you see in almost all my writing is some fragment from my real life experience, like girl pie, the fact that this was a sweet name that Mom had used, and that she's the star of my children's books for girls, girl pie. And so that there's always that sense of something about the organic life that I've lived coming through in the books.
You set your mother's picture next to you to do this program.
I absolutely did.
Can I take it and show it to our viewers?
Absolutely.
Tell us about her.
Tell us about Mom?
Yeah.
Well, I just said that she's, an incredible cook, which I think is really, I don't know, I'm just one of those people. She's still alive. She informed me, however, that she would not be looking at Book TV at its regular time because she's a church-going woman. Mom and Dad, they've been married 50 years. Mom is someone, I think, who really, tried hard to be the embodiment of the perfect 50s woman. And, I think that she and I were always at odds because I always wanted to be more like my grandmother, whom I couldn't find a photo of, Mom's mom, Bebe, whom I truly write a lot about. And, I think sometimes in families things go in weird cycles. Like, I am very much, I feel, my grandmother's child in the sense that my grandmother was very, very into her opinions and into her, way of seeing the world, kind of an outsider and a renegade, and that Mom is much more of a person who likes to conform to the status quo, and who likes you to be more feminine in the traditional sense, and all of those things.
We're going to open up our phone lines and invite our viewers to join us. Bell Hooks is our guest for In Depth this month, and she's going to take your calls for the next 2 hours and 40 minutes. So the phone lines are open. Here's how you can join us. 202-585-3880 if you live in the Eastern or Central Time Zone, and 202-585-3881 if you live in the Mountain or Pacific Time Zone. You can also email her a question. We'll get on as many emails as we can today at booktv@cspan.org. One email came in early, and this is, I'm sure, a question you get every time. When and why did you decide to use all lowercase letters in your name?
Well, before we start with the email, I said, if we're going to show Mom's photo, we have to show Dad. What happened to Dad?
No, okay, I'll get Dad out.
You find Dad, and I'll talk about why,
okay, that sounds good. I wouldn't leave your father out.
In the
can't do
lowercase.
that. Sure.
Bell Hooks, you know, is my great-grandmother's name. And early on in feminist movement, we used to talk about it's not important our names, it's important what we're saying. And so we often chose pseudonyms. And as many people know, women chose pseudonyms in the 19th century. But for me, I chose the lowercase as a way of kind of de-emphasizing the sense of who's speaking. But often it hasn't worked that way because it's made people obsessed with the lowercase. You weren't able to find Dad's photo?
Here. I think, is this it?
No, that's me and my brother, who my children's book about boys is dedicated to. Dad's picture is him in the pool hall.
Oh, of course, I've got that one.
That handsome guy.
As I went through him, I didn't know which one it is.
I know, because he looks so young and handsome.
I would have said this was your brother. When was
Dad
this
will
taken?
like that. Dad is an incredibly handsome man. He is 80 years old. We had a wonderful 80th birthday party for him. My dad was and is a reader, and he is the person that I write about having so much inspiration. Both Mom and Dad were readers, but my dad had his shelf of books, and you know, he was a boxing fan and a boxer. And one of the things I felt very strongly, that my father came up in that generation of working black men who were thinkers, who felt that even though no matter the job you did, you really needed to read and think and be politically aware. So I tie that love of reading to Dad.
And where did he help you out in terms of your decision to write a lot about feminism?
By being a real patriarchal man. I mean, that's the downside of Dad. You know, Dad is like so many men in America who are patriarchal, that as he's aged, he has become more mellow, more loving. And, you know, I think that when we have that tremendous revolution of feminism that really affects men, men will not have to wait until they are getting close to death to be able to explore their feeling sides and to be more emotionally aware.
First call for Bell Hooks is Lexington, Kentucky.
Hello, sister.
Hey.
Peace and blessings to you. I had the opportunity to see you in Lexington, Kentucky a few years ago, and I had a marvelous experience there, and I wanted to say I appreciate your books, which I'm certainly infusing myself with at this moment. A very beautiful sister and a very wonderful writer. I'm the proud father of 3 children, one son, Jimmy, and 2 daughters, Jocelyn and Jasmine. And I'm curious as to how I can infuse them with strong feminist theory, and I can sort of get out of their way as a father and make them to know and understand what strong feminist theory is. And I was curious as to whether you could answer that question. And
that's a wonderful question. Any man can help his children be strong in terms of opposing sexism, because what feminism really is a movement to end sexism, sexist domination and oppression. So when children have a dad who shows his respect for himself as a man, not as a sexist man, but just in his love of himself and his respect for the women around him, not dominating, non-violent, mutually engaging in partnership, that's the best example any man can give. And of course, to add to that, the reading and study of feminist theory, of women writers, all of those things let girls and boys know the kind of non-sexist world we want to be in.
Lafayette, Indiana.
Are you saying Lafayette, Louisiana, maybe?
No. Oh, okay. Is it Louisiana?
Yes, Lafayette,
Thank you.
Louisiana.
Go ahead.
Well, I'm Jacqueline Ceballos. I'm president of the Veteran Feminists of America. Last week at Barnard College, we had a salute to feminist writers who changed the world. I looked all over for Bell Hooks. Phyllis Chesler. Everybody gave me her name, but you know, we do the work of 10 women or 10 men at one time, and we just can't reach everybody. And now I see her on television. She's so beautiful and wonderful, and we'll just have to give another one to it to honor her. And I tell her that, Belle, we'll be calling you, but we need your address so we can get in touch with you easily. Thank you so much.
One of the things that people forget is you can really get in touch with any writer by writing to the address that's in any book. Like if you write Bell Hooks, care of HarperCollins. I know I write some of my writers. You know, when I read a writer whose book I love, I try to write to them to tell them what this book has meant to me. Because I think all writers feel good to know that we have readers who are moved by our work. And I do that the same way I'm telling audiences. I go to the book and write care of the publisher.
And we have the address of your publisher at the bottom of your screen if anybody wants to write to you. Next call is Olympia, Washington.
Hi, Belle.
I'm
My
listening.
name is Yvonne, and I met you recently at the Evergreen State College. I'm the one that walked into the auditorium and you waved to me. In any event, after reading your book, Sisters of the Yam, Black Women in Self-Recovery, I've since taken with me the notion that, of course, as students, and as you attest to in your book, black females have an peculiar struggle in terms of the academy. My experience has been no support in graduate school. Can you tell me a little bit about what sustained you? I mean, you talk about how you had this, how you created a sense of self in your home in terms of keeping community with you, living in a predominantly white community, but at the same time expecting of the academy market some sort of support. What would you advise?
I think in any environment we're in, there's always someone in that environment who will nurture us. And one of the things I constantly advise students of all races, but particularly black female students, is to search out those people who can be that light for you, that guiding light. But you have to be willing to look in unexpected places, because often I've been helped or guided by someone that if I had been following, set notions of who could be a person who helped me, I would not have been with that person or followed that person. And I think that we have to be radically open is the phrase I use a lot in teaching to transgress, and looking out for who will be our support. Throughout our time together today, I'll probably talk about my own spiritual practice, because that's been something that has sustained me from girlhood on into the present day, as in moments of trial, in moments particularly during graduate school, when I felt all the constraints and conflicts of a racist, sexist environment, being able to look to divine spirit as a place where those things of race and gender fall away, and then we can dwell in a sense of pure spirit. So I feel like whether you're a believer or a non-believer, to recognize the value of cultivating a spiritual practice. Whether you're, as Alice Walker says, a worshiper of trees or what have you, but to know that spirit matters when it comes to sustaining ourselves through difficult times.
Has your spiritual path paralleled with your political path?
Oh, absolutely. I mean, in my spiritual path, has always been one of searching for a way out of what I often call Western metaphysical dualism, the idea of good, bad, inferior, superior, that kind of Western metaphysical dualism that's the roots of domination. And for me, it led me first to, Islamic mysticism, the Sufi poets, because I started as a writer, as a poet, to Rumi, to Kabir, and then, to Buddhism as I met poet Gary Snyder when I was 18 years old, and he turned me on to Buddhism in a whole new way. I had been interested in Buddhism from reading Jack Kerouac and the Beat Poets, and so Buddhism was so much about the whole question of right action as opposed to good and bad, and a notion of punishment, but a notion of how do we center ourselves so that we can be guided to bring peace and harmony in the world, and to confront and end suffering.
want to show the cover of the upcoming book. What is it?
My new book is called Rock My Soul, Black People and Self-Esteem. Because as I went on the road with the second in the Love trilogy, Salvation, Black People and Love, many, many people would say to me, you know, we can't even get to the question of love because we are grappling with the issue of basic self-esteem. And I think that, you know, this is one of the ongoing struggles collectively African Americans confront, you know, within a context, a cultural context of white supremacy. How can we build a healthy self-esteem that is essential to well-being?
This is the book Salvation that you mentioned. Tell us about the cover art.
That cover art, again, is a picture that I saw years ago, and I loved it, and I had it in a postcard. And then when I was getting ready to do this book, I thought that immediately of this image. The title of it was Seek What Is True, and it was a photograph taken by a young white woman photographer, Constance Larrabee. She died just shortly before the book came out, and I was so sad that she didn't get to see her photo. But her work is at the Smithsonian. She was an incredible young woman photographer who came here to this country from South Africa and lived until her death. But I love that image of journeying, of walking down a road, that sense of the trajectory of African American experience, because, you know, philosopher Cornel West has written a great deal about the idea of African American experience as an experience of exile, that we are an exilic people. And so I love this cover because it has that sense of the diaspora, that Black people have traveled and that our psychohistory encompasses so much. South America, Central America, Brazil, Africa, so many places that are part of the interstices, the makeup of what we think of as African American.
I want to ask you to explain some more of your covers, but let's get to some more phone calls, so we'll come back to that. Lexington, Kentucky again. Go ahead.
Hello, I'm a 27-year-old black female who grew up in Glasgow, Kentucky, which is also a very rural place. And I had the benefit of knowing that there was a bell hook who had, you know, made it out of Kentucky and done such amazing things. And it's been a lot easier for me, of course, even growing up with that rural background. What specifically for you kind of, I guess, inspired you or just gave you that inspiration to make it out in a way?
Well, I have to go back again to the church, and I want Connie to show again the cover of Rock My Soul, because on it is the image of another Kentuckian. That is Muhammad Ali's fist on the cover of Rock My Soul, and who was then Cassius Clay. And, you know, there were the Clay family in Hopkinsville, Kentucky, and we were often grew up hearing that, you know, he was a distant cousin. But I think that for many Kentuckians, the church, Black Kentuckians particularly, for me, my church was a place that didn't just teach religion, but also cultivated creativity. I wrote my first poems to be published in, you know, the church magazine, so that I see for many, many people in small towns like Hopkinsville, Kentucky, our church was not just, you know, about learning the Bible. It was a kind of cultural center of learning about self-development and self-actualization. So I can see that as a central part of my aspiration. It was not so much to get away from Kentucky or from my community, but to become someone who would have much to give back to that community and to give back in the arena of racial uplift.
San Francisco, you're next.
Greeting, Bill. How you doing? I just wanted to tell you that I'm absolutely inspired and basically in love with your work and your spirit, and simply because I believe that you simply tell the truth about where we are in the world. And there are two books in particular that have just served as a guiding force in my life, and that's Sisters of the Yam and Real to Real. And basically they've helped me shield myself from the way that white supremacy tells our story, or at least the distorted version of it. And I wonder about how we as Black people and basically people of color in this world can deal with how the world is being covered right now through the American media system. I mean, I feel like I get drained in watching how, you know, stories tend to be one-sided and based in white supremacist ideology. I just wonder how you would advise me to basically protect my spirit from that.
Well, one basic advice that I offer all black people, and I think women of all races, none of us can watch television all the time, especially, you know, standard television, and be self-loving, because the messages that we receive from it often are negative messages about race, about gender, so that I really encourage people to explore alternative media. You know, earlier today I was talking about what I like about C-SPAN, and not just because I'm on it, but because it gives us a voice, like today, to be a writer who can really talk about what you're doing as opposed to little sound bites. And I think that part of what we have to do as African American people within the context of imperialist, you know, white supremacist, capitalist patriarchy is be vigilant about the kinds of images that we take in. You know, when I went to the store to buy books for my nieces and nephews, and I found that a lot of the children's books oriented towards black kids, I thought, were negative in their values. They were sexist, they were overly didactic, they weren't playful and cute. I thought, well, okay, let me see what I can do here. So I think that it's not only that we be vigilant about the images that we allow ourselves to consume, but we allow our imaginations to make us cultural producers. So we produce the images we want to see.
The caller mentioned Reel to Reel. It was published in 1996. What was it about?
Reel to Reel is an analysis of film. A lot of my work has looked at the cultural critical work as the impact of media on how people love, how people think, how people change themselves. You know, I really have written a great deal about Spike Lee's work, and that's in Reel to Reel. It's one of my favorite books because of its sort of juxtaposition of that whole sense of media not only being something that portrays culture, but that makes culture.
You have to tell us who's on the cover here.
Now, who on the cover is me. That was the first time I allowed myself to be on the cover, and I thought I was being clever because I had on my shades and I had my hair out, and many people really didn't recognize it as me because they were used to me wearing my hair more like it is on Communion, where it's just pulled back.
Baltimore, you're next.
Hello.
Hello, you're on the air.
Thank you. Bell Hooks, my name is Lornell Custis Butler, and I want to tell you, you have such joy on your face, and I don't have that joy. And here is a short poem that I want to dedicate to you. It's very short. Black Woman, Show Some Joy on Your Face by Lornell Custis Butler. Right now, black woman, you are worthy of your earthly presence. In the beginning of God's earthly paradise, the snake of Satan deceived the black mother of all humanity, but did not kill her in defeat. Rising from a fallen moment, black Eve dispelled her gloomy fate and showed some joy on her face. Joy, endurance, brings assurance of life survived in the downtime of poverty and spiritual despair. Right now, black woman, you are worthy of your earthly presence. I want to thank you, Bell Hooks, for having that, because so many of us black sisters are walking around in urban America with such pain and despair that we don't look happy.
Absolutely. I write about this, particularly in Rock My Soul, Black People and Self-Esteem, that's coming in a few months from Simon & Schuster. I'm very concerned with the question of what it means to be positive and affirming. And lots of black women, you know, are besieged. My students used to say to me, well, why do black women look so harsh? And yet when I had them go out and do the work of finding about the statistics about our health, the impact of heart disease, the fact that we're more likely to die of breast cancer disproportionately to our numbers. We have HIV and AIDS. So many statistics that when they gathered those statistics, they could begin to see, you know, how much money we don't make. As a collective group, all of those things, they begin to think differently about why when they would see black women on the subway or on buses or in menial jobs, people weren't smiling. But, you know, of course, I say in my work is that we have to smile. I mean, Thich Nhat Hanh, the Vietnamese Buddhist monk who influenced me, is constantly saying how we have to smile to our pain, because we have to think of that joy as a space of resistance. a place where we are not allowing those forces to dehumanize us. So thank you for the poem, and you know, I think we have to let our light shine constantly and see that as an act of political resistance and spiritual affirmation.
From Elizabeth Gailey, this email, would you comment on the general reluctance of black women to become involved in feminism?
Many black women fear losing what little connection we have with black men as it is, and white women too. I mean, we have to remember that white women en masse haven't been that engaged with feminism either, but certainly there have been more white women involved in the movement, but there are many more white women in our nation. I think that black women have been reluctant to critique sexism and engage the movement that would change it. Because we really do want to be in harmony and struggle together with black men. And many people see feminism as something that immediately cuts you off from black women, but from black men. But what I find is more and more black women recognize is that the forces of male violence, male domination, I urge people to, you know, think about the new works that are coming out that talk about black males being more violent, oftentimes, more anti-gender equality in their emotional lives. They maybe think it's fine for women to go out and work, but then want to dominate in the home. These are some of the forces that are really compelling black females of all ages to think differently about gender and, as a consequence, about feminism.
Next call, San Diego. Hello.
Hello, good day. Hello.
You're on the air.
Hi, Bell Hooks. Pleasure to talk with you. It's a wonder to talk to a living legend. My question is, what was your inspiration for writing Happy to Be Nappy?
My inspiration for writing Happy to Be Nappy was that I would, first of all, like African Americans to stop spending the millions that we spend on hair care products to straighten our hair and spend it on think tanks and spend it on public education and reading and literacy. But we can't begin to do that until we start loving ourselves just the way we are. You know, there's a line in Happy to Be Nappy where it says, you know, it starts off saying, girl pie hair smells clean and sweet. It's soft like cotton, flower petal, billowy soft. Now, when I wrote those lines, and then little girls come up to me, and little black girls, and they say, you say our hair smells like flower petals. No one's ever said that. You say our hair feels like flower petals. And you can see how a book can have a transformative impact. It's very different from a kind of book that will say, oh, your hair is ugly, but you should love it, which I thought the other nappy hair book was to me, a very anti-child affirming book, because it starts from a negative. I think we have to start from a positive, that we have to not be overly didactic, and that children will get the message, as I get so much feedback from children for Happy to Be Nappy. It's all about self-love and self-esteem.
I can't remember which book it is, but you write in one of your books about people coming up to you and wanting to touch your hair.
Absolutely, and I like it
at least once a day.
You know, I like nothing better than the people I love and the men in my life and my male partner, when I have one, to enjoy my braids, touching and caressing, because that's all part of black people loving ourselves, loving our bodies. And in Rock My Soul, Black People and Self-Esteem, you know, I just talk about the intense body hatred that continues to be a part of black people's reality in the United States.
Do you think it's only black people?
Absolutely not, but I think that when you add race to it, and then you add the fact that we don't control the production of our images, and that so many of those images are negative. I mean, I think black people suffer more within white supremacy. I mean, and Andrew Hacker in his book, Two Nations, and all the writers who've written Orlando Patterson's work, clearly there is a special hatred white supremacy reserves in our nation for black people, and it comes out in what we expect and how we view black people, how the images are created. So I think that that's why black people struggle. You know, I mean, when I finished my dissertation and was going on the job market, I was encouraged by my white advisor not to wear my hair in braids to the interview. I mean, more black females have people tell us what we should do with our hair so that it's not natural when we go for jobs. So clearly there is a whole way in which being black within a white supremacist culture, and I want to tell audiences that I use the phrase white supremacy often instead of racism, because white supremacy allows us to encompass our own internalized racial self-hatred, because black folks who are growing up in completely all black environments where they're being told they're not light enough, their hair is not straight enough, that's white supremacy, but it's not coming from white people. So I think we have to think about that overall concept and how it frames our nation. Very few, I think it's 1 in 20 people are born blonde, but look at all the people that are dyeing their hair blonde, and many of us used to know that commercial, is it true blondes have more fun? Well, studies show that it is, because in a white supremacist culture, blondness stands for all those sort of Nazi, Aryan, ideas of superiority, and women find, white women, that if they dye their hair blonde, even if it doesn't look that great, they get more attention, they're seen as more interesting, and that's white supremacy at work in our daily lives.
Next call, Flint, Michigan. Hello.
Hi, Professor Hooks. Pleasure to talk to you. I've enjoyed your writing, Teaching to Transgress in particular. I had a question about standardized testing with that phenomenon becoming a national issue. Could you speak to the whole question of standardized testing and our ability to touch upon cultural diversity and respect that in the classroom?
Well, I think that, first of all, I want to just give praise to all the teachers in Flint, Michigan. My sister is a teacher in Flint, Michigan, and in fact, it is coming there and going into her public school often that I talked with kids about love. So Flint always has a special place in my heart. My sister Gwenda, who's one of my biggest supporters, and for me, the issue of education starts, I don't think we just can come in and challenge standardized testing. First and foremost, we have to stand on the right of every child to learn how to read and write, because a lot of kids from disadvantaged backgrounds do poorly on standardized tests because often they have not had the basic skills to begin with. So it's not so much that the test is the problem, it's the way they've been prepared from the very beginning. So I'm really ready for a revolution in public education that would make standardized tests unnecessary, because all children would be adequately prepared.
Here's a picture of you on the subway in New York City.
That was me going to work at City College, where I worked before I took my more recent position. I loved riding the subway up from the West Village, where I live, to City College, and I often would ride home with my students, and we would have our books or be discussing on the subway, and I just love that sense of education, moving beyond the classroom, moving from uptown to downtown. I'm a tremendous, fan of Langston Hughes, and my whole sense of moving from, the West Village up to Harlem, and I hear his poems in my head, that whole sense of movement and rhythm of black life, that was there in his dream-deferred poems, when he says, I said to my baby, baby, take it slow. He said, I can't, I gotta go. A certain amount of traveling to a dream deferred. So that image of me on the subway captures my own journeying and my traveling from the world of the West Village to Harlem to uptown to City College. And I like that image very, very much.
Let's show people where you live. Maybe this is a good time to kind of get into where you write and live and work.
In the West Village, where so many writers, where Baldwin has lived, where Margaret Mead and Norman Mailer and Eudora Welty for a time. I mean, I feel that I'm in the midst of this whole sort of psycho-history of wonderful writers in the West Village, and I've sat there with Amina and Amiri Baraka and talked about that history, and it's a wonderful place to live in the city. I always feel like people say, how can you be without nature? And of course, my street in New York is tree-lined and pretty wonderful.
This is the inside of your home, where you
work? Yes, these are sculptures on the floor made by a Buddhist artist in upstate New York.
Buddhism is important to you?
Yes, it is, and the heads have different things on them, questions like who, what, when, where, why. There is my Buddhist altar with orchids. I'm a big orchid fan. In my home in Florida, I have many orchids growing, they are such a hardy and beautiful plant, and I think of them when I think about African American culture, the beauty of something that endures and sustains and resurrects itself.
So what's it like to write in the place where you live?
Well, when people want to come and see my study, it's the world's smallest study. I say I've always written in very enclosed spaces. And so I think that I kind of like to shut out everything. I say it's almost like a monk's cell that I write in, you know, and I just sort of sit there. I handwrite a lot. You know, when I knew that C-SPAN was coming and going to take a look at my writing world, I thought, well, there won't be a huge computer. Or, you know, I handwrite and then I use a small laptop to put things on. So
there's your writing area.
There it is, coming from another room because it was so small. I say it's about the size of a big closet. And I sit there and work and
think. Is it an enveloping kind of feel?
It totally is an enveloping kind of feel. You know, I think about, you know, I wanted so often as a child, I fantasized being a nun or, you know, that sense of contemplation, because I feel that first and foremost in my life, I'm a contemplative. You know, when people ask me how I would define myself, I always say that I'm a seeker on the path, that sense of spiritual journeying is the core of my identity and being. So that space of enclosed space of contemplation, of silence, has been tremendously important to me as a thinker.
This doesn't look like a very comfortable chair, Belle.
You know, I've written about having great sex in that chair, and many people have said it's not a very comfortable chair, that red chair. I love the color red. In fact, you can show people my latest book that just came out, When I Remember, I See Red, and it's all, you know, about memory and the paintings that I did for a show in San Francisco. But that little chair is quite comfortable. I've written all these many books sitting in that chair for me, but people are always telling me it's very hard. But maybe that's part of that whole sort of would-be saint part of my personality that likes the austerity and the rigor of it. So,
asleep in the dream, house of red, heavy with memory, caught in the gap, awake in shrouded silk. What are you trying to do with this book?
Well, in this book, let me read something from it.
Sure.
In this book, I try to infuse the whole idea of personal and political memory. Particularly, for example, have a painting in here that's in honor of the 4 little girls who were killed in Birmingham. Cynthia, Denise, Addie. Because I feel that so often people forget those little girls and they forget their martyrdom. So I wanted to have a piece of art that would show their images, Denise, Carol, Addie, and Cynthia, and it's 1963. So it kind of shows something about my own development as a thinker and a writer, the merging of the personal and the political. There are images of me as a girl, and then there are the images of these little girls who were really martyrs so that people like me could be free. And let me see if I can read the text that went along with this particular image. It says, "Sin is red, not black, not the color of forgetfulness. We remember in red that will not come clean or wash away. Red bleeding into pure space, changing the tenor and tone of our lives." And I wrote about that because this was one of the experiences that galvanized Angela Davis politically. The bombing, she just couldn't believe, she was in Europe at the time, that in her country, the home of the free, that anyone would bomb churches. And when we talk about terrorism, many people forget about the, you know, white supremacist terrorism that we've lived within. And the end of this book has a long passage about memory that says, "This do in remembrance." And it says, "We are born and have our being in a place of memory. We chart our lives by everything we remember, from the mundane moment to the majestic. We know ourselves through the art and act of remembering. Memories offer us a world where there is no death, where we sustain loss by rituals of remembrance." So that informed my my whole sort of love of the color red. And, you know, Connie, you've just sort of shown the audience how the bell hooks mind kind of works, that we went from that red chair, which the writing place, but I also defined it as an erotic space, and then we took that color red into my own creating of art in this book. And that's kind of how I think of my mind. I always tell people I'm like Michael Jordan as a basketball player, that I make these leaps, big leaps, big jumps, that I'm all over the place moving my mind. And in fact, I've just done the bookmark for next year's National Children's Book Council, and my poem on the bookmark is all about the mind moving, leaping across the page, leaping through a book, being changed and transformed by the art and act of reading.
Bell Hooks is our guest. Let's get some more phone calls. San Francisco, you're next. Hello.
Hello, my name is Vanessa, and I'm calling from San Francisco. I just wanted to let you know how important your books and your writings and your words have been in my personal journey through white supremacy. I mean, Sisters of the Yam helped me survive college in oppressive New Haven, Connecticut. Bone Black helped me understand kind of my relationship with my mother in a context. I kind of felt your words when you spoke of your mother in that book. And Teaching to Transgress is actually something I'm really exploring and going back to right now, because I'm going to be a teacher this fall, an elementary school teacher. And I'm sitting here thinking about how you said that white supremacy reserves an absolutely special hatred for black people. And I think that that is one of my motivations for getting into education, because I've been working with prisoners for the past 2 years. And I'm wondering if you can tell me some things, maybe 3 things that you think we as black people should be working to instill or reawaken in our children. Because I love that you're talking about personal and political memory, and I think that's part of my idea of how I want to go into the teaching profession.
Bell Hooks.
Well, thank you for reading all those different Bell Hooks books, and I think you embody what I think is the ideal way to approach a Bell Hooks. The other day at the LA Book Festival, someone said to me, which book should I read first? And I said that you should choose a Bell Hooks book according to your need. And you just articulated how different books satisfied certain needs. 3 things I would instill, I would say, first of all, positive thinking, the belief that everything is possible, and third, the constant, giving and receiving of love. Because I think that if we can love, if we can create, if we can use our imaginations, we can not only endure, we can triumph, and we can resurrect and be born again in whatever we need to be born again into.
We'll come back to this a little bit after we take some more calls, but this is the memoir, and you'd been writing a long time before you dug into this.
Well, I began to write Bone Black, and there's a picture of me. I always say, if you could see that hard forehead, I said, here is the intellectual thinker at work. I'm looking at some kind of
with a red background.
Toy. Constant red background. I mean, I was telling Connie that I'm always involved in the design of my covers, because I think to have this little black girl on the cover is important. When Toni Morrison wrote The Bluest Eye, and I should tell audiences that I wrote my dissertation, my PhD dissertation on Toni Morrison, one of the things Morrison said was that she'd looked around her and there weren't books with little black girls at the center of them when she wrote The Bluest Eye, which I think is one of the great all-time books that we can read. And for me, putting those images and writing this story, one of the things I found, Connie, as I was getting older, writing and thinking I'd read a book a day, was that I was beginning to forget memories. And so I thought, well, I want to write a memoir of this time in my life, because I don't want to forget those memories. And anyone who's read Bone Black knows that it's written really in terms of powerful memories. I always tell my students that if you meet someone and you want to get to know them, what we usually do is we share memories, and we share the powerful memories that have shaped us, as I do in Bone Black, the memory of my grandfather, the memory of, things that happened as a girl. a little boy accidentally shooting another little boy, the things that stay in our minds, both that and Wounds of Passion have been important memoirs for me. I'm a big fan of memoir writing precisely because I feel there's so much about women's lives in general and African American female lives in particular that we have yet to fully understand, and we've had so many black writers die. Like, for example, Zora Neale Hurston. We don't know why Zora Neale Hurston did not have a child. We don't know if she was infertile. We don't know anything about that aspect of her life, and we will never know. And that's, for those of us who are literary historians, who are, you know, literary critics, that not knowing is incredibly painful. We want to know about her choices in the way that we know about Virginia Woolf's choices, and yet we'll never have that information. You know, I'm waiting to see biographies of Lorraine Hansberry, you know, Audre Lorde. These are women who've both been, you know, powerful influences in my life. They're also lesbian women writers. We really need to have more of those stories. Toni Cade Bambara, incredible black woman writer who died, a friend of mine and comrade. You know, there's so much about her life that we don't know, and if we're not willing to speak the truth, I mean, early on, a caller said that my books are very important because they tell the truth, and I thought about when she said that how much I've emphasized openness and honesty as part of healing in the Love books, in Sisters of the Yam, and in the new book, Rock by Soul.
Another call, Swarthmore, Pennsylvania.
Hi. I was wondering if you could speak briefly to the rise of third world feminism and possibly where you see a space for solidarity between women in the West and women who are involved in the feminist movements in other parts of the world, and where you see that space possibly without sort of an imposition into different cultural understandings of what it is to be a woman.
Well, first and foremost, if we want to stand in solidarity as women in the West, women and men in the West committed to ending sexism and patriarchy with other countries, we have to be willing to genuinely learn about those countries and what's happening in them, as opposed to bringing our assumptions about the lives of people to those countries. I'm really a big fan of the work of Zila Eisenstein, who has written a lot about our engagement with women in other cultures where we impose Western cultural imperialism. And I think it's really, really vital for solidarity of any kind that you go to people where they are, that you listen to what they have to say about their experiences, and that become the place where you bond. You know, one of my really good friends is the writer, filmmaker, theorist, feminist theorist, Trinh Minh Ha, Vietnamese woman. And when we first met, again, we shared both the experiences that we have in common, but that also are different, and our different positionalities, because whenever we talk about bonding cross-culturally, we have to talk about what does it mean to open yourself to different ways of thinking, to allow that what we think of as freedom might not be freedom for someone who has a different sense of the dailiness of their life. What does it mean to learn how to respect those differences? I think that international feminism, third world feminism, requires of us a larger understanding of what it is to be working against sexism in the world. Because, you know, the truth is, if you're in a country where masses of people are starving, the feminist issue that you may be more concerned with is how to feed people rather than how the guy in your life is treating you. And so I think that part of that respect of other cultures comes in being able to put things in a holistic perspective.
Here's this email from Alicia Turman in New York City. She writes this: I am a black woman in my mid-20s and am developing as a poet and a writer. My first question to you is, do you feel that you are sometimes preaching to the choir? I try to talk to my contemporaries about self-love, self-respect, and doing the business of the black community, and it seems to fall on deaf ears. Do you have any of the same issues, and how do I get them to hear and feel me?
Well, first of all, I want to go back to what Buddhist teacher Pema Chodron says. Start where you are, and we have to go to people where they are. I think whenever we're talking about how can I get people to do something, we are usually, you know, starting out from a wrong positionality. It really has to be, how can we connect with people where they are? And if we want to share something that can help people change, then that's what we have to do. Not feel that we can change someone or that we have what's right. I mean, you have to know someone, you have to know a situation to know whether you have the answer for it. Also, I think one of the hard things of life that I've had to grapple with is that you may share knowledge or information with someone, and they may be resistant at one point in time, and it may actually come back to them and help them at another point in time. I can't tell you how many readers say, I threw that Bell Hooks book in the trash can, or I threw it against the wall, but then I came back to it later when I felt a particular need, and it opened up something for me. So I think that we have to remember that the work we do may not manifest in a reward immediately, but it can have positive impact down the road. We may never even know that.
Memphis, Tennessee, you're next with Bell Hooks.
Hello.
You're on the air, ma'am.
Hi, Miss Hooks, I was just channel surfing and I saw you talking about black hair. There was this wonderful book called Napoli Ever After. I think the author's name was Tamara Johnson, who just, she was the first one to introduce this topic. I'm a 30-year-old mother, and at the age of 28, I was diagnosed with breast cancer. And, of course, I went through all the chemo and everything, and I lost my shoulder-length hair. But what was so odd about that was I wasn't upset about the cancer. I was upset about losing my hair. And, I mean, I was upset about losing the hair. Of course, after reading that book, that kind of put things in perspective. We hold, as black women, we hold so much of our self-image on our hair. And I have a daughter who's going to be 6 on Thursday, and already she's starting, you know, to look at the old little girls, the ones with the long, silky plaits, because, of course, she had my original hair, you know, very thick, hard to manage and hard to control. But now that I look at it, losing my hair was the best thing for me because that's the only thing I connected as, you know, as being a woman. I didn't like anything else about, you know, about myself. But my hair was proof that, hey, I was a woman. Never mind the fact that I had a daughter and other things to show it. And I just totally agree with you. I mean, the media bombards us with so many images of, you know, long, silky hair, blonde hair, you know, they're selling contacts and this, that, and the other thing.
Memphis, thank you very much.
Well, I think, first of all, we have to not talk about our hair as difficult to manage or difficult to control because, you know, I look at many of my white women friends, what they go through and dyeing, but they don't talk about their hair negatively, even though they may spend hours getting that do that comes out looking pretty natural. I think black females have to change how we talk about our hair. We have to talk differently about the hours it may take to comb out hair that's nappy, but those hours can be seen as joyous. They can be seen as a kind of meditation. It's how we talk about it and frame it that has the impact on children. If you're telling a child, any parent, that they should want to have their natural hair, when you're then talking about it negatively, you're creating a space of contradiction. We have to come up with new ways, as Malcolm X says, new ways to see ourselves. We have to look at ourselves with new eyes.
Yeah, Colt Washington.
Good afternoon, Miss Hooks. I used to enjoy reading you in Z Magazine. I was wondering if you could tell me what's going on with your relationship with Z. Also, I wonder what, in your opinion, are the Eurocentric and patriarchal limitations of Marxism, but at the same time, could you explain what, in your opinion, the relevance of Marxism is today in the light of the recent Enron scandals and just the basic alienation, I think, that most people feel going through the workday as far as being completely separated from any kind of humanity in their lives? Thank you.
Well, you just named the relevance of any kind of critique of capitalism today, that it invites people to think about how we're living our lives, how materialism is affecting us. And as far as Z Magazine, I simply stopped writing for different magazines for a while. You know, writing for magazines is a much harsher thing because you have to meet deadlines. And so, you know, I'm teaching, I'm writing, I'm trying to finish my book. So there are times that I just take a break from magazines, but it doesn't have any deep significance beyond that.
And his question about Marxism.
I answered that in saying that Marxism, like any critique of capitalism and materialism, is fruitful for our times, because these are times of grave hedonistic waste. I myself am very concerned with ecology and the environment and what we're experiencing around electricity and water. And so all of those issues, you know, that I write about, certainly in Where We Stand, Class Matters, I think affect us today. And the patriarchy, I mean, the fact is, Christianity is patriarchal, Marxism. The fact is, we're all smart enough as women and men to be able to separate off those aspects of any given thought that are useful and leave behind that which simply perpetuates the same old domination. I say that about any book we read, because there are writers I love to read, but I may find that there's racism and sexism in their work, but that doesn't stop me from learning what I need to know from them.
If you're interested in the craft of writing, Bell Hooks has 2 books that she's written with essays about writing. One is Remembered Rapture, The Writer at Work, and the other is Wounds of Passion, A Writing Life. We'll talk more about them as the program goes on. Next call is New York City.
Hello?
You're on the air, sir.
Hello?
You're on the air, sir. Go ahead with your question.
Hello, how you doing, Ms. Hooks? My name is Akin Moses. I'm a student at NYU. And I took a class last semester called Black Women's Writing with Clyde Taylor. And we were talking about, you know, feminist movements in all aspects of black culture, and we specifically talked about female movements in hip hop. And I was wondering if you could speak on that, you know, specifically like Lil Kim and Queen Latifah and stuff like that, and the relationships and significance of kind of having a rugged, raw, kind of like ghetto a little bit, just rap sentiments that have relevance in this whole feminist movement and what it's doing for little girls, and what it's not doing, what the potential is. Do you know what I'm saying?
Well, the positive aspect of some female-oriented rap for little girls is, again, the power of the female voice, speaking openly about topics like sexuality or violence. And the negative side is when that's just done in a traditional, sexist, patriarchal way, and it seems like Little Kim embodies that. You know, I interviewed Little Kim. She actually, her responses to my question about love very much inspired me to write all about love. And what I see is, she told me years ago that she wouldn't be in a porn film, she wouldn't do certain things. And of course we see her doing all of those things, the boob job, the blonde hair, the over-sexualized image. And so I think clearly, far from being a powerful representation for young black girls, she is a negation of young black girls, of herself. Little Kim in person is just an incredibly beautiful, thoughtful young woman, but that's not how she can make her money in the machinery of white supremacist capitalist patriarchy. So, you know, I think that someone like Queen Latifah has been a strong counterpart to that overly sexualized sex object. But, you know, all women in the entertainment industry today fall prey to having to work that sexual tip. And as long as we are objectifying ourselves in the interest of economic whoredom, we're not positive representations for young girls of any race.
So is the answer walking away from it?
The answer is creating more interesting cultural products and demanding that people, you know, I always say to my students, when was the last time you've seen a boycott of a movie? You know, when have we last seen people stand outside a movie and say, see this movie, but pay close attention to the sexism or the racism. You know, see this movie, but remember that these aren't real black men you're seeing, that you're seeing some racist white person's idea of black masculinity. I think of movies, for example, like Traffic, or other movies where black men are portrayed in degraded and dehumanizing ways, and black females. But, you know, what are we doing to counter those images, to create different kinds of images? That's the most important thing, because just critiquing something isn't enough. We have to have new and exciting images, liberating images.
Speaking of images, let's take just a moment and go through a couple of your books and ask you about this cover art that you say you're so involved in. First, here's the one that we talked about before, with the picture of you in the front, and what did you call it? Dreamy-eyed?
Yes.
The dreamy-eyed look on your face.
Well, it's my Rodin. It's my version of myself as the thinker. I mean, as audiences can see, I'm frequently putting my hand in that position here.
Yeah,
that
things haven't changed a whole lot, have they? And you were how old then?
In my late 20s.
And this one, from Art on My Mind, Visual Politics.
Now, this is a monotype, and it is of my grandmother's house, my mother's house, Bebe, and I had gotten a grant to do this project about her house. Now, the image in the actual image has a writing at the end of it. It says, "My heart is burning in this house, where love was, where I dreamed in the dark my deepest dreams." Because shortly before I did this artwork, the house caught on fire. And my mother had, because it's a small town, had been able to go over and see the house of her childhood burned to the ground. And she, because that's really just the shell that you're seeing in the picture. And on the phone, my mother kept repeating that it was such a hurting thing. So out of that, I created this particular image of the house, and you know, the writing under it that said, you know, "My heart is burning in this house, where love was, where I dreamed in the dark my deepest dreams."
This one, Wounds of Passion.
Wounds of Passion, those are my hands. And there was this riff on stigmata in the book itself, because as I've been talking about my interest in spiritual life, I read a lot about the saints, and Saint Teresa of Avila is a guiding mentor for us. I always feel like I have these dead mentor people. Saint Teresa of Avila, you know, Thomas Merton, Henry Nouwen, the spiritual teachers and writers whose work guides my vision, and that really informed Wounds of Passion.
And you said that the photographer didn't like this?
No, not the photographer, but one of the publishing people that worked on it felt that it was sacrilegious and satanic. The fake stigmata.
Next is Richmond, Virginia. Back to the phones.
Hello.
You're on the air, sir. Go ahead.
Yes. How you doing, Ms. Hooks? I'm a returning college student in my 40s here in Richmond, and studying film with an aspiration to be a film producer and perhaps change some of these images. For so many years I've heard, you know, all of the complaints, many of which I really feel are legitimate about our portrayal in film. But my question is, don't we have, as black men and women, more responsibility to take control of these images? I mean, I'm the son of a black female, and growing up, a lot of women in my family have really been the strong ones, and I really do my best to be the best man that I can possibly be. But we hear so much, and it's very, very, very sad in my college classes. I'm twice as old as most of my classmates, and there's just nothing but complain, and it seems like the pendulum has swung the other way, and this big tent that everyone wanted to start it out with, just inclusion, to include the black man, to include all females, to include the black female. And I tend to have some fairly conservative ideas, and now I'm not included. And so in the course where we studied your book, it's a film course on black images, and we studied your book called Black Looks. And the instructor goes on and on about, I mean, he's a great guy, don't get me wrong, an excellent instructor, but there's so much about white supremacy. And, you know, when I asked the question, well, what about that counterpart that you have to have when you discuss white supremacy, which is black inferiority, why can't we focus on doing away with that and not have this pendulum swing the other way to the point where we become almost worse than those who have oppressed us, to the point where we want to exclude everyone who doesn't think just like we think?
Thanks, Richmond.
Well, I personally don't actually find that to be the case in my own classrooms or other classrooms, that blacks students want to exclude everyone. But I think people who are wounded and oppressed frequently want to hunker down with their own kind, whether we're talking about gypsies in the world, different Jews in the world at different times. Whenever people are feeling oppressed or imposed upon, they tend to want to hunker down with their own kind. I hear that some from my white male students who feel like they're not getting the attention that they feel they're entitled to as white men within white supremacist capitalist patriarchy. You know, before you came on, I talked about the fact that we can't ever just critique images. We have to talk about the images we want to see and create them. And I gave the example of my own self doing that with my children's book. For example, the new children's book I have about black boys, I feel that there's particularly degrading, dehumanizing images of black males everywhere in our culture and frequently in black homes. So for me, my answer to that is not just to make that critique, but to start, you know, from the bottom up and to try to create new images of black masculinity, images where we can talk about what does it mean to be loving of black boys and to not have a hostile image of black boys. So I think that you're right on in saying that we have to constantly be reimagining, imagining anew, creating the different contexts. As far as, you know, critique is useful in helping people see, to know that what their experience is real. You know, oftentimes people will say to me, I went to that movie and I felt bad, but I didn't know why. And an essay you wrote illuminated something. But critique is never enough. We always have to imagine the world that we really want to live in. And I think that, you know, any kind of dogmatism, whether from the left or the right, keeps us from that reimagining, because we really need, as I talk about in Yearning, which is one of my favorite books on race, class, and gender, we need that space of radical openness in order not just to critique what is, but to create new ways of seeing, thinking, and being.
You know, you have so many books. I'm sitting here juggling back and forth, making sure that as you mention one, I can show to our viewers. Here is Yearning. We haven't shown this one yet. And why is it one of your favorites?
Yearning is one of my favorites because it's one of the first books on cultural politics that I did, and I feel that it covers a lot, a range of things. And as this particular gentleman caller was talking about, one of the things I proposed at the very beginning of Yearning is, rather than taking looks at what divides us as people, whether racial divides or gender, that we might look at, you know, what brings us together. So one of the things I suggested at the beginning of this book is that we share yearning in common. You know, I believe everyone yearns for love. That's one of the reasons I also wanted to write about love. I was interested in topics that cut across race, gender, class, that bring people together, that have us have common senses of our experiences. And how would we work from a place of commonness to settling differences that we might have? So that I think that that's why Yearning continues to be one of the books I love the most. Connie.
Here's another one of them, another one of her books, Where We Stand, Class Matters. Take a look at the cover of this as we take the next call from Dana Point, California. Hello.
Good morning, Bell Hooks. It is a pleasure to watch you today. You are just a light of wisdom and spirituality, and I think such a confused world, and it's just been great watching you today. I do have two questions for you. The first was one that just kind of popped out as I heard another caller talking about, you know, the victim that fell to cancer and lost her braids. I've always viewed the braids as a symbol of strength and as a symbol of progression. And I'm not African American. I'm actually Mexican American, and I've always wanted to get braids, and I actually made an appointment, and I'll be getting braids next week. But I'm wondering if I'm treading on a territory that maybe I shouldn't be treading on, understanding now just how important those braids are to the self-image of an African American woman.
Well, I'm always thrilled when I see any woman wearing her hair in braids, any girl wearing her hair in braids, and I don't think of them at all as the special turf of African American women. I think, in fact, that as we see more, you know, different women wearing their hair in braids, it just affirms for black females that this is a wonderful way to to be in your natural hair with your braids. And I think that when I talk about braids, I'm not talking about people going out spending their last money. I mean, Connie held up Where We Stand, Class Matters, on artificial horsehair so they can have long braids. I'm talking about really enjoying, whether they're, you know, as I say in Happy to Be Nappy, those short, tight naps or plaited strands, all let girls go running free. You know, it's all about self-love. And, you know, there are many people who have natural hairdos that don't have self-love. So we mustn't make it seem like how you wear your hair becomes the all indication of what you feel in your inner self and in your inner life. It's the beginning. I mean, self-love is crucial. Connie held up Where We Stand, Class Matters, and I think that's the book. There's a little white girl from West Virginia wearing the kind of little nighties that I used to wear growing up. And I mean, part of what I think is important is that as our nation, we need to have a new and more humane image of the poor. And that includes many African Americans, because we are among the poor. And it's all our body image. And it starts with feeling not only that we can feel good about ourselves, but that we can be happy when someone else from another culture or another group mimics us rather than threatened. I mean, when people are threatened, it's because they feel like something can be taken away from them. You know, one of the things I say in Black Looks is that when we love blackness, when everyone loves blackness, we won't have to fear that anything can be taken away from us. We can have our culture shared and know that it still is ours in a root sense. And until that happens, I think people will continue to feel frightened or diminished or defensive.
Silver Spring, Maryland, you're next with Bell Hooks.
I'd like to ask one question to Bell Hooks. Have you ever written about matriarchy? Have a source or a strong base of resistance in a patriarchal society?
Well, I don't see matriarchy as the answer to patriarchy, and I have written about it in that sense, that I really believe that the answer to ending domination, whether we're talking about patriarchy or race or class, is mutual partnership. So I don't believe, I'm not one of these people who believe that if women were in charge, because women can be as patriarchal in their thinking as men, and many matrilineal societies that sometimes people call matriarchal societies were based on the same notions of domination as patriarchy. They were just inverse. I mean, when women feel like, when women say to me, we're more capable, we're the ones who are more capable of giving care and nurturance, I think that that's poppycock. That's just more of the inversion, or it's like black people saying, well, white people are bad, but we're really good. I mean, these are the inverse ways of thinking about domination. And I'm much more interested in us talking about what does mutuality look like? What does it mean for us to honor the female and the male? What does it mean for us to honor all of who we are in our holistic selves, the feeling part, the thinking parts, etc. And then I think we don't need either matriarchy or patriarchy.
Next, Manhattan Beach, California.
Hi, Bella.
Hi.
My name is Chris. I'm calling from Manhattan Beach, and I've enjoyed listening to you today. You seem so full of wonder and curiosity and full of love for this earth experience. Could you talk a little bit, please, about honoring the process of writing, getting past self-doubt, getting past judging the work, so that the writer can just let the process flow?
Well, I think you just named it all. You named exactly what I tell would-be writers and writers in distress, that a lot of people are blocked by their inability to just do the writing without judgment. You know, one of the things I always loved about Michael Jordan as a ball player was that he said that even though he was enormously gifted and even though he can play so well, he has to practice. And the same is true of writing, that writing is a craft and a discipline, and I write, I know, every day because I have to keep working with that craft, even though I have all of these books. And so you said all the magical things that one needs to do. If you want to write, you have to write. The more you write, the better you get at writing. And of course, it's important to read. That's why I continue to say to people, I read a book a day, because I want them to understand that you know, I'm not just the thinker, writer I am out of my own head. It's also all the wonderful information that I'm learning from other writers, other thinkers, that challenges me and that causes me to grow.
From your book, Remembered Rapture, here's a quote. You say, "I have not yet found words to truly convey the intensity of this remembered rapture, that moment of exquisite joy when necessary words come together and the work is complete." That was 3 years ago. Have you come any closer to being able to
those
give words?
About, you know, of the ecstasy of writing? Not at all. And I think that Remembered Rapture came close for me in voicing some of that sense of what it feels like to just be given the gift of creating. I mean, maybe you'll show audiences my new book about love for kids, Homemade Love, but that's
sure,
there.
Yeah, I will.
Because somehow I tell people a lot of times things come to me in my sleep, and I wake up and I go to the desk, and Homemade Love is my new book. About love.
Children's book.
It's a children's book, but it says, you know, it starts with, my mama calls me girl pie. Her sweet, sweet daddy's honey bun, chocolate dewdrop, homemade love. And, you know, I that came to me out of where? That's why I believe so in the divine. It just sort of came, and I thought, when I worked with the illustrator, who's a young black man, Shane, he said to me, you know, what's a chocolate dewdrop? And we were talking about the power of the imagination. You know, the thinker and writer Evan Van Sertima, in talking about black people and white supremacy and colonization, says we're not just colonized in our minds, we're colonized in our imaginations. And Toni Morrison recently has been talking about meeting children that are smart but that lack the power to imagine. So that I think that partially we have to see how incredible a force of resistance to any form of domination the imagination is. But it comes from this place of mystery. You know, when this little book came, I was just like, where are these thoughts coming from? And then in some of them, I told Connie, I particularly like the one with the little girl with the dog, because I want there to be images where black children, here it is, you know, this is after she says, everything I do cannot be right. But all the time, all hurt can be healed, all wrongs forgiven, and all the world made peace again. And I wanted to have this image of her with her dog, feeling all good, feeling that sense of unity with animals that's so important to interbeing and to life on the planet.
But you said that African-American children sometimes are afraid of dogs?
Yeah, I think that...
Or is that a stereotype?
I don't think it's a stereotype. I think that we have a psychohistory of many hostile white people using their dogs against us. I live in a predominantly white neighborhood where I notice that many white people chat with other people about their dogs, but if I try to talk with them, they immediately react with fear. And animals are like, you know, children. If you're the parent or the owner of the dog and you're showing fear, the dog may respond hostilely. So I think what has happened for many black people is encountering white people and dogs where the dog is being hostile has increased that sense of fear. I mean, you know, we all know that owning a pet is an expensive thing. So since many black people are among the poor, people may not be accustomed to growing up in a home where there are pets. Or like me, I grew up in a rural world where we had dogs, but they were hunting dogs. They were not necessarily pets in that sense of how many people think of today. So I think there is often that fear that permeates, and it's not just a stereotype, as well as, you know, there are many black people who are dog lovers, but we may not necessarily see them. Certainly in my neighborhood, there's much more predominantly a white neighborhood, and you see people out with their dogs fellowshipping, and I think this is a crucial thing for all kids. But particularly for groups of kids who may not have that, who may never have had a pet and may never have one. Where does the feeling of comfort come from?
Washington, D.C., you're next. Hello.
Good afternoon, Ms. Hooks. I was introduced to your works as a freshman at Howard University, and now as a 25-year-old woman, I just wanted to say thank you for opening my eyes to uncovering truth. Through your books and reading Salvation Now, and I just like the way that it's helping to challenge my ways of challenging just everyday thinking in society. And just bless your heart and continue to do the work that you were meant to do.
Well, I think that it's just so exciting to me to think about how books change people's lives. And I know that as a professor, I'm teaching now at Southwestern University in Texas. I'm the Brown Visiting Feminist Scholar in Residence there. And, you know, we work together there. We're, as faculty, as students, as staff, trying to think about what does it mean to teach across boundaries. And it's amazing to think about, for me as a writer, I feel an intellectual who thought, you know, that I'd only ever be read by a small group of academic people, to have written both very academic books and books that are for a more popular audience, and now children's books. I just feel really uniquely blessed and thankful. So I'm thankful to all of you, the readers, who have made it possible, you know, for me to write this huge range of books.
Albuquerque, New Mexico.
Hi, Bell Hooks. I'm very glad to have a chance to speak with you. I have a my past work has been in community development, where we bring all community members together for joint planning for projects that they collectively design and establish together and benefit from as a community. And when I read it, it was very exciting to read Teaching to Transgress, because it felt like you apply those same methods of participation in the classroom, where people overcome previously conceived ideas and cross boundaries and collectively or collaboratively learn and grow. And it's also exciting that these methods, as I learn more about where they're being employed, they're also being employed in architecture and in public health. And so I would like to ask if you feel that these techniques are applicable in many sectors of social life. Thank you.
Essentially, they're techniques of teaching community. At Southwestern, I designed a sort of teaching program that's aimed at bringing us together as a campus, bringing students, staff, professors together. And our first theme was teaching community, because in any organization, in part, what people do is they establish community together. You learn how to communicate, you learn how to dialogue across differences, you learn how to problem solve together. So a lot of those things came for me in my own practice of teaching, and inspired me around Teaching to Transgress. And it's interesting because I'm writing more and more about space and architecture, and particularly about design, because I'm interested in how we bring those principles of harmony and balance, the same kind of principles in creating community, to how we build buildings. Do we build buildings that enhance our lives? I just did a project with the row houses in Texas, Project Row House, which is an art project where a group of artists, black, white, got together, bought these little houses and made them, which is an architectural form, the row house or the shotgun shack or the railroad house, that was used by the slaves that came originally from Haiti. And these are little houses, and they created galleries in those houses and homes for single moms. And if your people are in Houston, Texas, they should go to the 3rd Ward and see this project. But it's all about the question of what does space create? Because when you see those houses, you see that part of what that architectural design created was a way for people to live in community. When you see those little black children who are coming out of a context of poverty, but who are living in the midst of wonderful art, who get to have a Bell Hooks come and talk with them. I just had 10 paintings of shacks, because I'm obsessed with the idea of the house and architecture. I also think, as a feminist thinker concerned about the planet, that housing is one of the extreme political issues in our nation and everywhere right now. As homelessness becomes more a norm, how will we have housing for the future? And all of those are critical questions.
Hopkinsville, Kentucky.
Hi, Bell Hook.
Yes.
Caller, I'm going to ask you to please turn your television set down, because we're getting feedback. Thank you.
I was just calling. You're still getting...
Still a lot of feedback. Got to turn it all the way down and listen to through your earpiece.
Okay. I was just calling to tell you that we are proud of you in Hopkinsville, Kentucky. I am a friend of your family, and I understand your surroundings as far as your church and how you grew up, and I just wanted to let you know that we are really proud of you here.
Well, I'll be in Hopkinsville soon. We're all coming home to see Mom for Mother's Day, and you know, Hopkinsville it will always have its special place for me as that place where I was first embraced as a young thinker. You know, I go everywhere in this nation to public libraries, my favorite one being the Harold Washington Library in Chicago. But I go everywhere, every time I'm on tour, to public libraries because they were the real center of my growth and development. And I urge everyone in our nation to support public libraries, because if you don't have the money, when people come up to me and they say, oh, I can't buy that Bell Hooks books, I remind them that that's why we have public libraries in Hopkinsville, the public library. There are my teachers, and of course the incredible nurturing African-American environment that I grew up in has been really crucial for me and sustaining to me as a thinker and a writer.
I want to pull out 2 emails here, and I'm going to kind of try to condense what these folks are saying, because they really go on to other questions, but they both tell 2 different angles of your work and how they're concerned that it doesn't touch certain people. One emailer says, a good friend tried to introduce me to your work some time back, but I got turned off to feminism in college because most of the feminists I met and read seemed to have castrating and emasculating personalities.
Well, you know, that's one of the reasons I wrote last year. Last year was a big working year for me. I came out with 3 books: Where We Stand, Class Matters, Feminism is for Everybody, and one of the Love Trilogy books. But part of why I wrote Feminism is for Everybody is that most people have a misguided notion of feminism. And I find it so funny that, you know, I am such a militant, radical, feminist thinker, and so often when people meet me and they see, you know, this loving spirit, because I think visionary feminism is always about love, they're surprised and they want to say, but you're not a real feminist, because they've got some kind of stereotype in their head. And that's why I wrote Feminism is for Everybody, Connie, so people could have a short book, a very accessible book that would really let them know what feminism really is, and sort of challenge a lot of those stereotypes that come at us. Or, you know, we may meet one individual feminist that is man-hating, that is all of those things, but you have to go beyond that one individual.
Okay, let me go to the second email, Matthew. And he says that he's a 36-year-old broadcast engineer, lives in a predominantly white area of the United States. He says, when I first read some of your works 2 years ago, I found your language racist and biting to me personally. But your words on feminism, a fresh interpretation on movies and media never left me. I've since read 3 of your books and feel that terms like white supremacist patriarchy tend to turn a lot of white folk away from the monumentally insightful perspective you have of American culture. Are you interested in communicating with parts of the country that do not have a large African-American community, but need to explore issues of gender and race that continue to affect us nationally?
Well, I think it's important for people to realize that the majority of Bell Hooks readers actually are not African-Americans. They are white readers, so there evidently are plenty of white people out there who have no trouble hearing that our nation is founded on principles of white supremacy and patriarchy. But, you know, I think, you know, I'm a really person who's really positive about recovery movements. I'm really a positive person for all the critiques I would bring to bear on AA or NA. I'm positive about it because it's one of the few places in our country where people can seek healing and they don't have to pay anything. But one of the things that anybody who's dealt with an addiction and tried to have recovery knows is that you have to break through denial. None of us would go to a doctor and expect that we would be healed if the doctor didn't tell us what was really wrong with us. You know, if we had a heart attack and the doctor said, oh, but you've got a splinter in your toe, that wouldn't be very helpful. I think as a nation, as Marianne Williamson has written so eloquently in her book, you know, The Healing of America, we have to face the difficult truths and use the difficult terms. And as you can see both from my presence here and if you read enough of my books, I try to use those difficult terms with the kind of compassionate insight that is not about blaming, but allowing us to own what is our reality and change it.
Atlanta, Georgia, you're next. Good morning.
Greetings.
Good afternoon.
Greetings, Belle. My name is Shay Zahn. I'm a writer for Roll It Out magazine. We had the privilege of reviewing your book, Salvation, Black People in Love. But the reason why I'm really calling is because I am actually a poet, and I work in a collective with a visual artist by the name of Fran. We're working with Emory University to do a new project showcasing the beauty in women. We're calling it Sister Flowers and connecting the beauty of all women, of all cultures, with the beauty of flowers. Would you be interested, and how can I contact you about reading some of your work or sharing some of your empowering ideas with some of our audience?
Well, once again, we've told everyone that you can get in touch with Bell Hooks by writing to South End Press or HarperCollins. Any book you have will have an address in it, and you can write Bell Hooks, care of that book. People keep mentioning the Love Trilogy, and I wanted particularly to mention Communion, the last in the Love Trilogy, because it's called Communion, the Female Search for Love, and really is a response to, as all the love books were, to people in our nation being very cynical about love. But I particularly wanted to focus on the way that we seem to be asking too much of young women. And I wanted to read this particular passage that said, "When I first saw the film version of Charlie's Angels, all I could think about was how glad I was to be in my 40s and not receiving a cultural mandate telling me that I must be superwoman in the world, girly girl on the home front, and have the tight flesh of an Olympic athlete, while maintaining an ability to submissively throw myself at the feet of an all-powerful, symbolic daddy named Charlie. The contradictions in this message are obvious. No wonder, then, that we have a nation of 20 to 30-something females, addicted to antidepressants, angry at feminism, with crippling low self-esteem. No human could measure up to the standards mainstream culture sets for them." I mean, so much of my writing about love has been trying to talk about the way in which self-love serves as the true basis for self-actualization. And I say that because I think this is particularly crucial for women and girls of all races.
Why don't you hand me the book? Let me show the cover to our viewers, because we haven't shown that yet. And you explain what it is, the cover is.
Well, first of all, the cover of Communion is designed by the same photographer, Marcia Lipman, who did Remembered Rapture. I love her photographs. And, life is full of magical serendipity. When I went into a store, everybody knows that for magazines I write about fashion, and I'm a real fashion-obsessed girl. And I went into one of my little favorite boutiques in Soho, and they had one of Marcia's photographs on the wall. And I thought, wow, that's so beautiful. Do you know how I can get in touch with the artist? And the woman was not able to share with me, and I just looked her up in the phone book. And when I called her, the day that I called her, she was reading a Bell Hooks book. Marcia goes all around the world taking photos of many things, but she's many of the Buddha images you see she's taken. The photo on Communion is a photograph taken in Thailand. Earlier, a young woman asked about third world feminism. I think that bringing this particular image is to the cover. I've tried to use my covers to bring the artwork, particularly of women who have not received the attention that I feel they deserve, to a larger public. And I hope we can show the work of artist Emma Amos, who did the cover of Killing Rage. But that explains that particular cover. But I think that book covers are a marvelous way to make people familiar with artists that they may not know about. And of course, Outlaw Culture has the very, very famous photo of Andre Serrano. You can tell I'm a person who likes photographs. I have my own art collection, the Bell Hooks little eclectic collection, and it's filled with photographs.
We'll talk more about Killing Rage in just a minute. Let's take another phone call for this one from Charlottesville.
Yes, good morning. I'm a big fan of yours and have been for a long time, and I greatly appreciate your use of the word feminism as an African American. And in light of what you said earlier about having to have a vision of where we're going, I was wondering if you would talk about whether you see some of the racism within the feminist movement of the 70s and 80s healing and including African American women, whether you see a future of a feminist movement in any way.
Well, first of all, I mean, I am militantly and gladly feminist today, in part because of the incredible camaraderie I found with individual white women within feminist movement who did indeed challenge their racism and change. And while that may not have happened for the movement as a whole, I always tell people, you know, if I have a choice between 10 white people that are racist and won't change, and one white person who's divesting of their racism and helping to create the beloved community, I know who I'm going to choose. And rather than focusing on the people that won't change, I want to focus on the person who has changed and who can be a guiding light and a force for other people. And that's one of the ways that I see feminism. I think feminism is the only movement for social justice in our nation where there has been such profound self-critique, where, you know, many white women, many women of color, there's been this exchange, and people did in fact change the way they teach, change the way they write. And I think that we have to praise feminism for being able to do that. Not only that, I think incredible thinkers like myself, notice how I'm not at all modest about my own sense of what I bring to bear to the table of feminist theory, but the fact is there have been so many women of color who have created the feminist theory that has been life-transforming for everyone, and I think that that has shifted the direction of the movement. And as I say, in feminism is for everybody. I'm looking forward to the day when we have a feminist movement that truly addresses everyone. I am deeply concerned about the fate of men and boys in our nation. In all my feminist theory books, I've really talked about men as comrades in struggle. So when I hear people say, oh, feminists hate men, I think, what feminist are you talking about? The feminists I know love maleness, love men. I want Connie to show this new book that I'm worked on for boys, with black boys at the center, because I would share with people that it's hard in a patriarchal culture to write a book that is loving of boys, but that does not reinscribe patriarchy. And I worked really hard with Chris Roska, who was the illustrator for Happy to be Nappy, to create this new book called B-Boy Buzz, which is all about loving being a boy. And here you have a white person and a black person, me and Chris. We come together to create these books. When I first chose Chris, I had gone to bookstores to look at images. I didn't know if he was female or male, black or white or Hispanic. All I knew was that he created images that were playful, that danced on the page, and that was really important to me. And I think our collaboration is what Beloved Community is about. And, you know, I can go to Chris. I was not happy with the first part of the book when the book came together, because there wasn't any image of a black boy reading, and I could go back to him and say, you know, I want to have images of black boys reading, not just moving and jumping. So there's that image of being quiet. And Connie may find the image in there where there's a boy saying, hold me close, don't let me down. And we're seeing this boy being emotionally embraced by his dad. And that, I think, is so important when we talk about changing the world so that boys can have love and be loved and be in touch with their emotional universe. You know, the psychotherapist Terrence Real has a book called How Can I Get Through to You, which I think is an excellent book that talks about how we need men and boys to be in touch with their emotional universe.
Now, some teachers may take umbrage at your grammatical use in the first page, I be boy.
Yes, this is the playful, but I think it's very poetic, and I think that it's always important for teachers, Connie, when a writer uses something that is not grammatical, to put it in context, to put it in the context of poetic writing. Because this little book kind of riffs around I be boy laughing, I be boy crying, and you know, and it tries to create a universe for a boy where there is a range of emotionality, because we often don't allow boys that range of emotionality.
Is this in the bookstores yet?
This will be in the bookstores in a few months.
Auburn, Alabama, you're next.
How are you, Ms. Hooks? The pleasure is all mine. I was wondering if you could briefly discuss the impact of the war on drugs on the black community. In particular, if you think that our government's anti-drug efforts in many inner-city communities has contributed to that loss of or that inability to imagine that you were talking about earlier.
Well, I think that whenever we're talking about addiction, whether we're talking about drug addiction, sex addiction, shopping addiction, we're talking about the loss of the inability to feel, because we're usually, when we're addicted to anything, we're usually trying to cover up the hurt. So first and foremost, I write a lot about addiction in Rock My Soul, Black People and Self-Esteem, because I think that, you know, irrespective of what the government is not doing to clean up drugs all around our nation, the fact is we are accountable in our lives and in the communities in which we live. But partially, we can't begin to deal with the question of addiction until we can deal with the enormous emotional suffering that people are in. And many black people, as I go around the nation, express this suffering to me. You know, when I first wrote Salvation, Black People in Love, it was actually raised by some people in the industry who would, you know, buy this book. And I said, there are lots of black folks out there that are in emotional pain, that are yearning for answers. And true enough, I can't tell you how many times black men stepped up to me to buy 4 and 5 copies of this book, because we're concerned about the issues, and we're concerned about the issues of addiction and healing. So what I want to see is you know, more programs for black people in our communities, you know, the wealthy black communities, the poor black communities, that look at the question of addiction in its relation to psychological well-being, because you know, many of us exist in a world where drugs are all around us, but we don't use drugs. So the question isn't what the government is or is not doing, but what we can do to heal and empower ourselves.
I want you to, you mentioned earlier this book, Killing Rage, Ending Racism, and you mentioned the cover art on it.
The cover art is very intriguing. It's from the artist Emma Amos. And what's intriguing about it is, like me, she uses a lot of work from her family, and from one of her uncles, she inherited the photograph.
This one right here.
Which is of little girls in Memphis, Tennessee. And she took that photograph and created this painting. And Emma is a contemporary of Romare Bearden. And she was one of the only women in the group called Spiral. She's a fabulous artist who lives in New York City. And this was my first sense of, when I met her, I was so concerned that more people didn't know about her work. And it was my first attempt to use a book cover to emphasize the work of an artist, but also the image itself, to think of the stars and stripes in our flag, in our nation's flag, as being children, as being about our hopes for the future. And, you know, our hopes to end racism, because the subtitle of Killing Rage is Ending Racism, and it's an incredibly hopeful book about our capacity to build beloved community.
Now, someone might think that the title, however, Killing Rage, is not very hopeful.
Well, that's why, you know, Killing Rage, Ending Racism, because I think the fact is, you know, we can't deny our rage. I've been, you know, I tell this story about going months ago to a retreat, for a Buddhist retreat with Thich Nhat Hanh, who, for Vietnamese people mainly, but he allowed me to come. And I was having an audience with him, and for some reason in my life, in the weeks before, I had been experiencing lots of racial injustice. I was angry at my ex-boyfriend, you know, and I went into the sacred space where I was going to meet with Thich Nhat Hanh, and I wanted to be that open-hearted, loving bodhisattva, and instead all I could say was, I'm so angry. And I had such a feeling of anger and injustice. And I think that part of why I titled the book Killing Rage was that people can acknowledge their rage. And as Thich Nhat Hanh says to me, hold on to your anger, he says, and use it as compost for your garden. So notice that he didn't say deny your anger, don't say you have it, but use it in a constructive way. And so when I juxtaposed, Connie, that title, Killing Rage, Ending Racism, it's to talk about, let's honor that rage, but yet let's use it in a constructive manner.
Next is Tucson, Arizona.
Good morning. Can you hear me?
Mm-hmm.
Oh, thank you. Good morning, Ms. Hooks. I just want to say thank you and a brief statement. I'm a 40-year-old black woman who has suffered from depression 30 of my 40 years. And I'm currently through a healing process. It has definitely because the way I was treated younger and in my 20s and work and all that. But I have gotten rid of all the medications and all the doctors and just determined that there's no other choice but to heal myself. And I want to thank you for coming into my living room this morning because you have been part of my healing process. Thank you.
Well, I certainly want to write more and more books that are about healing, that go to people directly where they live. You know, I think that, you know, when I first started writing the love books, many people said to me, don't you think as an intellectual this is kind of like, you know, disgusting to write these sort of popular books? And I said, no, I actually think it's a high calling to be able to write books in language that have complicated ideas, but that are in language that everybody can read and draw more people in, that are more inclusive. I feel really blessed, and I thank you for sharing your own struggle with depression and healing.
Abbeville, Louisiana.
Hi.
Hi.
Ms. Hooks, I wonder if you could expand a little bit more about the influence of Thomas Merton on your life.
Well, Thomas Merton, I think, like Henry Nouwen, the Jesuit priest, are both contemplatives, and they're people who, like myself, were eclectically concerned with a variety of issues in the world, both spiritual and political, so that, you know, if you read my love books, you'll see me quoting Merton on love, and just, you know, Merton's challenge around diversity, Merton's contacts with civil rights activists, if people read what he had to say about race. And of course, I have to throw in, you know, that Martin Luther King, in his later writings on love, is a great, great mentor figure as well. But it's that intersection of spirituality and our attempts to create a world of love that engage us with the political that made Thomas Merton such an important figure for me. And the fact that Merton and Nouwen bring together that whole sense of what does it mean to be a contemplative? Because, you know, I never used the word public intellectual to describe myself. It was something imposed upon me, but not in a negative way by other people. But in fact, in Remembered Rapture, I write about the fact that true intellectual life is really and you're only 40-something, I say, by being, you know, by myself a lot. And so Merton, Henry Nouwen, and the other spiritual intellectual thinkers, Daniel Berrigan, my favorite book, one of them in the whole world, is the conversation between Thich Nhat Hanh and Daniel Berrigan, The Raft is Not the Shore, all have been teachers who emphasize stillness, contemplation. You know, I give, for example, I don't give very many lectures in the course of a year because I like to have time that I'm talking, but then time that I'm really being silent and contemplating the universe. And Merton was a real guide and spiritual teacher for me in that way.
You make a point of saying in one of your books that you are not an elitist. Why did you have to make the point first, and what does it mean that you're not an elitist?
Well, I think that the fact is many people think that the moment you say that you are an intellectual, you are raising yourself above other people. That's why I think it's such a gift. I feel divinely blessed to be an intellectual who can talk with people of all walks of life, because I feel like I try to embody that spirit of loving kindness, of oneness, that I think is needed to create beloved community. So I think it's important for people to see that one can be a powerful intellectual thinker and at the same time be in community with others, cross-class. And so that's what I mean when I talk about being anti-class elitism. At the same time that I don't try to be dishonest about, it's a luxury to be an intellectual. You know, when people say to me, how do you read a book a day? Well, the truth is I don't have children. I live alone, you know, and if I can sit for 4 hours and read, that's a very luxurious kind of life in many ways, so I'm very mindful of that.
Next call, San Francisco.
Hello, good morning. I am calling out of the Bay Area, and I was a student of architecture at Berkeley when I was a little bit younger, about 10 years ago, and I design and build furniture and do interiors and things like that. But when I was in architecture school, one of the things I realized, I think, was that one of the greatest things I'll be able to build or help to create will be children. And I have 2 daughters, 5 and 6, and I'm around a lot of women, mothers, things like that. And I come from an Irish immigrant mother who was very, very, very nurturing, but also a strong woman. And I'm concerned when I see women of my generation who I think are not kind of in touch or acknowledging or accessing a lot of the beautiful feminine mother energy that women have. And that's something I wanted to hear you address, how you feel some of the younger women of the last 10, 20 years are connecting what they've learned from feminism and self-empowerment with being mothers, and are we losing some of that nurturing energy?
Well, in All About Love, I talked about the fact that as a culture we are becoming more anti-love and less loving. So that means that women are a part of that. And in part, we define power as against love or against emotional vulnerability. So as women seek more forms of power in our nation, if women have been the keepers of the emotional flame, then that flame is endangered. But it's not endangered because of feminism. It's endangered because patriarchal culture continues to be anti-love. Visionary feminism is always about love. And in fact, part of what Communion, the Female Search for Love, talks about is how younger women have fallen into the trap of believing that power is more important than love. Power is more important than the ability to connect. And the passage that I read earlier, I talked about them being very depressed and very angry. And the part of why they're angry, because power can never replace love. You know, Martin Luther King said that when he talked about love, he wasn't talking about some sentimental force. He was talking about a force that had the power to transform us deeply and utterly. You know, he talked about a love ethic. So I definitely believe that in a revitalized feminist movement, we will talk about visionary notions of love, which won't in fact require of women or men that we give up our emotional selves, but that we in fact nurture our emotional selves. I mean, throughout my love books, I tell people women are not more loving than men. Women give more care. But care is only one aspect of love, that love is a combination of 6 things: care, commitment, knowledge, responsibility, respect, and trust. You know, many of us are cared for by women who then are abusive towards us as mothers and with maternal sadism. So what we really have to have is a revolution of values like the kind King talked about, where we understand what it is to be loving more. You know, we can't love and dominate. So if women want to be in the position to dominate others, they're not going to be loving. And young women seem to have been really victimized by this kind of confusion.
You would have been how old when Martin Luther King died?
Still in my teens.
Were you aware of him at the time?
Oh, absolutely. What black person in America was not aware of his charismatic power? And, you know, but I have to admit, I was not a big fan of Dr. King as in my late teens and early 20s. In fact, I was the militant Malcolm X kind of girl. And it's really been in the more recent years of my life where I've truly gone back and studied the later writings of Dr. King. In A Testament of Hope, you can read some of those writings where he's really talking about new technologies and militarism and speaking about a revolution of values. I think that Dr. King is a far deeper thinker than many people ever imagined, because people stop at the I Have a Dream speech and they don't really read his profound critiques of materialism, militarism, and imperialism, which he calls the 3 giant triplets that he felt would put us in danger as a nation. And it's amazing that you can read his essays and see him prophetically talking about the possibility of things like 9/11 happening. And so I urge people to go back to Dr. King and really read what he has to say.
Next call, Center Beach, New York. Center Beach, are you there? Oh, let me push the button. Good morning.
Hello. Good afternoon.
Good afternoon.
I guess my main question is, I'm a PhD student. I'm getting my PhD in English. I just finished my Women's Studies certificate. And so part of the discussion that we have in my practicum is how do we get students, especially female students, to actually engage with the topic of feminism as something that they can accept for themselves. For example, we have students who always say things like, I'm not a feminist, but, and then they go on and say something like, I don't think it's fair that men are paid are paid more than women are, or so on and so forth. And it's interesting because in our practicum we actually read Feminism is for Everybody, and I think you have a lot of insight in there, but I'm just curious to hear what sort of things you would say to a student who is sort of still rejecting that label.
Well, first of all, I really would want to know, why does that term bother people? Again, when we talk about going as a teacher, going to people where they are, the important thing is not to try to push that term onto people, but to talk about, what does that term mean? If feminism is a movement to end sexism, sexist domination, and oppression. Now notice that that definition, which I first came up with in feminist theory, doesn't say anything about men. It doesn't pit men against women. It says a movement to end sexism and sexist domination and oppression. When I tell people that definition, they usually want to know, especially men, what is sexist domination and oppression? So I think that, you know, when dealing with young people in classes, female and male, is to try to take that definition and talk about what makes us afraid of it. What are we afraid of losing by that term? And I definitely find in Communion, the young women I talk with and I write about, the female search for love, is that many young women are afraid that if they ally themselves with feminism, they won't have partners, that they will turn off the men that they're seeking. And I know that not all women are seeking male partners, but a vast majority are. So that, you know, this is a big issue, because they have to come to see, as I say in Feminism for Everybody, is if we yearn for love, then we have to yearn for feminism, because it's only going to be in a mutual context, whether you're lesbian or straight or whatever, that you're truly going to have an experience of love. But for many heterosexual women, you know, learn late in life, because there's a lot of testimony in Communion from women over 40 about coming to understand late in life the true meaning of love and mutuality, and that many of us find love for the first time in midlife because we understand more that partnership and mutuality is the order of the day, and we look for men who are capable of loving if we're looking for male partners. And I think that's really crucial, to talk to young women about what is it about feminism that disturbs them, and to also have them connect with the visionary parts of feminism that help them live their lives differently.
This emailer asked, were you once a Christian, and were there some things within that faith that prompted you to start practicing Buddhism?
Was I once a Christian? I think that like many Buddhist Christians, I would define myself as a Buddhist Christian more than I would say I was once a Christian. And in fact, I tease my friends all the time, both within Buddhism, is that I love reading my Bible, and every day I pray and I say the 23rd Psalm, and then I do my Buddhist practice. You know, I think it's a kind of movement away from the idea of religion in that sort of dogmatic sense to the idea of spiritual practice. And I'm a big fan of the Dalai Lama's book, Ethics for a New Millennium, where he defines the difference between religion, which is about institutions and organizations and rituals, and spiritual practice, which he says are about values like care and love and forgiveness and respect. So I combine Buddhism and Christianity. That's why I said my favorite book is The Raft is Not the Shore, where Daniel Berrigan and Thich Nhat Hanh together talk about Buddhism and Christianity. But at one point, Daniel Berrigan, because it's about the Vietnam War as well, asked Thich Nhat Hanh if he had to choose between Buddhism and peace, what would he choose? And Thich Nhat Hanh says he would choose peace, because finally the organization of something is not as important as the spirit of it and how we're living it in our lives. So that's what I would say about Buddhism and Christianity.
San Jose, California.
Hello, good morning. I am a community activist, and I worked with young women in Brooklyn, New York, at an organization called Sister to Sister, and I've also worked in Brazil, Salvador, Bahia. And I was wondering what you thought about possibly connecting popular education with the concept of a love revolution, and how we could promote a transnational dialogue more towards the idea of what Malcolm X was trying to do in his last couple of years.
Well, a lot of what Malcolm was doing in his last years was trying to create a sense of what does it mean to learn cross differences in community. His journey outside the United States to Mecca had been so revolutionary for him and transformed his sense of whiteness. You know, he didn't stop critiquing white white supremacy, but he didn't no longer associated that with white people in some kind of blanket sense. So that I think that again, when we want to bring that teaching of community globally, we have to learn about people. I always tease people, who come up to me and they want me to explain feminism in 2 sentences or less, or if they want me to tell them about blackness. And, we have to study. That's why I keep talking about reading, because, what connects me to so many people in the world, to different cultures that I go into, like I did a big project a couple of years ago in Norway with women from around the world there, is reading and studying, and so that when you meet people, you can share together, even if you don't speak the same language. I do a lot of work in Italy. I have a honorary degree at the University of Ferrara, and I work slowly on my Italian, but it's not very good. But we find a way to talk about the commonalities of things, but also through reading, I learn about people, and then I can share with people myself. For example, I just took to the airport. I go to the airport so much in New York, and there's a wonderful woman who waits on me all the time who's French, and she's in midlife and has just gone back to school to study children's book. So I just took her Happy to be Nappy in French, which is Frisette son fait. But
when was that published?
It just came out recently.
Is it the only? Any of your other books been published in foreign languages?
Many of them in Chinese and Japanese and Croatian. This is why I feel so endlessly blessed as a writer. Certainly in Italian, the European languages. I don't have any books yet in Spanish, and I'm hoping that that will happen. And I'm myself continually studying Spanish so that I can speak it.
Davis, California, you're next. Go ahead.
Hi, I'm a doctoral student at UC Davis, and first I just want to thank you for your work, which has meant so much to me and just about everybody I know. My question is about ecofeminism. You mentioned earlier that you have a deep concern for the earth, and my question is, are you reading authors like Mary Mellor, Val Plumwood, and Vandana Shiva, who also publishes with South End Press? And if you're reading these people, what do you think about ecofeminist theory, about the term, and about its relationship to mainstream feminist theory?
Well, I think that we have to constantly critique any notion of the ecology that does not take into consideration questions of race and poverty. And, it's like whether we're talking about animal rights or the environment, we have to talk about, again, where people live, what they're grappling with. I mean, I read the very popular environmentalist people, the nature writers, and I often find them to be, coming often from very privileged backgrounds where they never seem to consider race or issues of class privilege. But that doesn't mean that we don't have to take those issues of environment to heart ourselves, and to think about the earth, and to think about what we're doing on the planet when it comes to wastefulness. I really am concerned with recycling. I'm concerned with not using more than I need, and encouraging us to, as the bumper sticker says, to live simply so that others may simply live. And part of that is thinking of ourselves as being a part interdependently of a universe that is the whole world, that is the entire earth, and just not the United States, so that we can use our water judiciously, our electricity, so that we can be mindful of our life on the planet. And, as the gentleman said earlier, if we get too bogged down in critiquing what is wrong with other people's thought, we don't do enough of the writing to celebrate our own relationship to the earth. Like, I've written a lot about black people as farmers tending the earth, and what that agrarian experience did towards enabling black people to feel their full humanity. And, we can see a link, and I really write about this in Rock My Soul, between the focus on material stuff and money and alluring of black self-esteem. And we can actually look at moments after slavery when black people were tending the earth, and they knew that, as I say, my grandfather on my dad's side knew that white people weren't all powerful, because in fact when he went out there and tended those crops, he knew that the white man could, no matter his money or what have you, could not make those crops grow. That that there was a force higher, and that was a humanizing, spiritual, awakening knowledge, and that relationship to the earth was important towards keeping black people in touch with our organic humanity. And often we've lost that in the pursuit of materialism, all of us as a culture, but often poor people and oppressed groups especially, because we come to think of money as our only hope of salvation.
Did you say earlier that you enjoy shopping?
I did, you know, but I shop judiciously, you know. In fact,
I was just asking you the difference between, because first you said you love shopping, and then we're talking about materialism.
Well, it's so funny because I just went to do a talk, and it was really cold, and I said to the students who picked me up, you know, is there a Goodwill around here? Because I need a sweater. And they were so stunned because they said to me, oh, but there's this wonderful, you know, fancy store that you could go to. And I had my fling with the fancy stores. I was a lover of Barney's in New York, because before I thought, wait a minute, you know, there's something more vital to the planet that I could be doing with my money. And so, you know, I'm a big fan of recycling. I'm a big fan of supporting young artists who are unknown. I just bought a lot of the work of a young Seattle artist, Tina Randolph, that I found her work when I was on tour. It was in the bookshop that I was reading in, and I'd rather spend my money supporting her art than, you know, buying the kind of fancy Gautier dress that I used to buy at Barney's. So that now, you know, when I shop, I try to shop judiciously. I try to share, and I'm a really big believer in trading things. You know, I like it when groups of women get together to bring the stuff you've bought that you don't use and share it or trade it, give it away. New York is a marvelous place for giving away, because you can just sit something out on your sidewalk. If it's not a rainy day, I get really annoyed with people who sit things out and then they get rained on. But I love it that you can set something out and someone takes it, someone enjoys it. And many a time I have picked up a book. I just need it. And it was just right there on the sidewalk for me.
Louisville, Texas.
Yes, I want to talk to you about the, excuse me, let me turn this thing off.
Please.
Okay. I want to talk to you about how very difficult it is between a black woman and a white woman, especially living in the South, to find and develop an authentic relationship between the two. I was running a women's resource center at Texas Women's University, and this beautiful young black woman came in, and we did sort of a dance there for a while, not knowing, both of us admired each other tremendously, but we just did not know how to connect with each other. And I went to a meeting of other professional women, and I was telling them about how difficult it was for me to make a connection, an authentic connection with this woman of color. And I really got dumped on. It was a feminist group. I don't know whether I didn't communicate correctly or what, but my clumsy efforts in trying to establish this relationship, you know, it was based on my admiring her for her courage. And I knew that she found something in me too, you know, but they just misunderstood completely, and I left feeling so bad. And then finally, because she kept coming back into the resource center over and over again, and I had another friend, she said, well, don't you know that black women in the South are so used to having boundaries because they're never touched by white women? She said,
well, absolutely. Let me just cut you off here to say that that's so absolutely true. And I think that when we want to bond across difference, the first thing that we have to know is what people are comfortable with. We have to respect where people are coming from. I had a Texas white woman just tell me last month that she had started a friendship with a black woman, but she'd never noticed that everywhere they went out to places that were white. And finally the black woman said to her, can we ever go out to some place where there are people like me? And the light bulb kind of went off in the white woman's mind that, oh, I hadn't been thinking that. You know, I think that you're so right on in saying that we've had a hard legacy as black women and white women, and the legacy of competition between women remains so strong in our nation as a whole. So when you racialize it, it's even more intense. And, you know, I'm a black woman whose very best friends in the world are, two of them are white women, and we've struggled a lot with our issues. And I want to share that part of what has kept us together in our friendship. You know, one of my best friends, April, is a friend of 30 years. She was my friend in freshman year in college, and she just came to New York with her daughters who were graduating, one of them, and her older daughters. And we sat at my table and shared with them what has kept our friendship going. But part of it has been telling each other the truth, and dealing with something difficult when it happens, not bypassing it. I remember when April had her first child, and I went to this little town she was living in, and her little kid came up to me and she gave me a hanky and she said, "You can wipe the dirt off." And she was talking about my skin. I turned to April and I said, "You haven't done the work of teaching your child about difference? I can't believe this." But if I had not been willing to be honest with her, if she hadn't been willing to own her, "You're right, I haven't done that. I hadn't been thinking about that." You know, we can't expect that we're going to have friendship cross these historical divides and differences without struggle, without pain. And the point is that we make a commitment to be together and to talk about these things.
This email from Topeka asks you the question, "I am seeing an overwhelming number of black men opting to date outside their race. What would you say to black men who proclaim to only date outside their race?"
Well, you know, I think that when any group of any people are saying, "I only do something," red alert should go off. Because I think that whenever you're truly loving, you know, true love really doesn't make these prescriptions. I'm only going to love you if you look like me. I'm only going to love you. It doesn't mean that we don't have preferences. You know, I might prefer to be with someone who is my height, my race, or what have you. But what does it mean to hold a preference and at the same time say that when love comes in my life, I'm going to open my heart to love no matter who the person is? And so, you know, what I always tell people is that there is so little love happening for most of us in our lives that if love comes your way, I suggest you grab it and not think about race or gender or any of those things at the same time that we know that we are living in a society of domination. And a lot of times, you know, as the poet Amiri Baraka says, "What I thought was love in me, I find to be 1,000 instances of fear." Sometimes people bonding cross-racially appear to be creating love, but in fact, one party may never have divested of their racism or their stereotypes. So just because we see more interracial bondings doesn't mean that we're seeing more love. The question is, you know, how many people in our nation who are white or have divested of their racism? How many people of color have divested of their internalized racism? Until we truly create love, that is that combination of care, commitment, knowledge, responsibility, respect, and trust, we can't have the love.
Fayetteville, Arkansas.
Hello, Ms. Hooks. Thank you for all your good work that benefits all of us and makes us think. And I want to change the subject, though I hate to because I'm really enjoying what you just said.
Feel free to change the subject.
Well, I want to get back to something you touched on earlier, and that was on religion. And I wonder if you could share with us, if you could talk about religion's power to heal and or torture, and its power to provide comfort and joy as well as despair. And could you talk about science and reality-based religion and ethical culture societies and your philosophy of religion?
Well, there is a wonderful book by a theologian called Mary Gray called The Outrageous Pursuit of Hope. And it is a reading of Isaiah where she talks about how, you know, in the midst of Babylon, in the midst of so many cruelties, and she tries to relate it to the political struggles that are happening around the world today for freedom, we can find hope in spiritual practice, in religion. I mean, the root meaning of the word religion is to rejoin, to connect. And we know that many writers have told us that only connect. So that I think if we look to, again, that definition of the Dalai Lama gives of the difference between religion and spirituality, what is crucial for the survival of our planet is that we have a spirituality that transcends and connects us across our different religious practices and preferences, because we know that all over the world people are using religion as a weapon of terrorism and hate. But you know, no genuine spirituality can ever be about hate, because it's about joining us and connecting us and bringing us more fully. You know, King wrote, when I speak of love, you know, when he talks about that Hindu, Muslim, Christian, Jewish, Buddhist belief, he writes, of love, he says it always returns us to a vision of wholeness, of oneness, and connectedness. And so I think that's a crucial thing for us to remember when we think about the necessity of spiritual life and spiritual practice, which may not require you to have a religious belief. Now, I particularly in my life enjoy religious connection as well as spiritual practice because of the fellowship of like-minded souls. But I don't think that we have to see the two as one and the same.
Irvine, California. Bell Hooks.
Hi, this is Ellen, and Bell Hooks, I was first introduced to you by an absolutely wonderful professor named Renata Cooper at Pacific Oaks College, and I don't even remember what was the first thing I read by you, but I am just so impressed with what a wonderful writer you are and how you have incredibly grown through your writing, and then the spirituality that you have created through your writing is just amazing to me. I just feel lucky that I was exposed to you when I was 6 years ago and that I have had this wonderful experience of you. I would love to be a part of a discussion group that fostered understanding and love between all types of people. I'm very fortunate in that I do have friends from many different backgrounds, and one of my closest family friends is a person who has shared both herself, her family, and her culture with me and my children. And I was also very lucky that in 1970, when many of the restrictions were lifted in a neighborhood in Irvine where all races were encouraged to buy and live together, it makes me cry because my kids were raised in a situation where they were exposed to all types of people and religions and cultures, and they are the most open-minded, giving, caring individuals.
Well, thank you for sharing that. I'm just going to cut you off for a minute and say that so that you can have a moment of calmness, but I truly believe that that's the community that we all want to live in. I actually don't find when I go, around the nation, even though we live in a really segregated world, people don't always know that because TV makes us think that people live together. But actually people live in very segregated neighborhoods. What I find is fascinating is most people don't seem to want to live in those neighborhoods. When you talk to people about the kind of environments they want to live in, people say that they want to live in environments of difference. So, perhaps people like yourself spreading the word, sharing how you've lived can help create that beloved community that King writes about, because I certainly write about wanting to live in that same kind of world of diversity.
We haven't shown this book yet, Breaking Bread.
Breaking Bread.
What is it, 11 years now? 1991.
Yes. That Cornel West and I came together to create Breaking Bread.
What is it about?
It is about the combinations of intellectual, academic, and notice that I make a distinction between intellectual and academic life. They're not the same. I think it's been a gross, misinformation for people to equate the two, because many people are academic and scholars, but they're not necessarily intellectuals, because intellectuals really, our commitment is to ideas. We have to be radically open. We can't take sides. We can't speak the dogma of an institution. We can't, because our commitment is to that working with ideas. And if I'm working with an idea and I put it out there, Connie, and then I find out 10 years later that I was wrong, the requirements to me of intellectual life demand that I can state that. And I wanted to say, I chuckled earlier when a caller said, I was nodding my head when she said, your works have helped us change and I've watched you grow, because I do in fact feel that my own growth as a thinker, as an intellectual, as a loving human being is mirrored in the progression of my works. And I think it's so telling that I would come to publishing those children's books in midlife, to a discourse that is playful, that is silly, because I think that when we truly open ourselves, we nurture that child within in that playfulness. So Cornel and I were colleagues together at Yale at the time. And one of the things that I found in my classrooms, especially dealing with African American students, that many of them had never witnessed a black man and a black woman talking together, disagreeing in a humane way. And I think if people doubt these things, they have to read Ellis Cose's new book, The Envy of the World, where he talks about the gender strife in black life. Certainly Michelle Wallace has given us many good books that talk about the gender strife in black life. And the fact is, we wanted to stand before the community in which we worked and represent for them and embody for them that kind of collaboration, that kind of camaraderie, even though we don't always share the same opinion about something. And that was the origin of Breaking Bread. I had the idea and I took it to Cornell and we did it and we spoke our different words. And I think it's been very important for people to have that and to see that. And at different times we've given talks together and people get to see that actually in action where I'm disagreeing with him. And, you know, though some people have written about us that we're just sort of glad handers of each other, it's really not true. We think very differently, and I have the letters that I've written to Cornell arguing with him about, you know, one topic, sacrificial love. You know, we were just having an argument about being too busy and his defining that as the work of, you know, doing God's work, and me saying that, you know, God never wants us to do anything that is damaging to ourselves. And, you know, if people really saw the dialectical exchange that takes place, they really wouldn't think that we're just two people who kind of opportunistically support each other, because we have profound differences and we have profound commonalities.
So what do you think of Cornel West leaving Harvard?
Well, you know what, I think I was never very pro Cornel West going to Harvard in the first place. I felt that, you know, Harvard and institutions like it are by their very nature conservative. And Cornell was one of the most, you know, dissident, sort of radical thinkers, particularly on the question of class in our nation. And to some extent, I feel, you know, the experience of any institution, as I said earlier, whether it's Cornell or myself, is frequently conservatizing. So, you know, I hope that, not so much that, you know, I'm concerned about Cornell at Princeton or Harvard, but that we will hear more from the inner Cornell, the scholar, the thinker, the incredibly smart man, and that we'll have more books and things from him, and less focus, because I think the whole sort of newspaper focus on this creates a kind of spectacle where people forget what is truly important about a Cornel West, which is his writing, his work, and not whether he's going to Princeton or Harvard or how much he's being paid. And I think that we're blessed by our work. I've had wonderful conversations with James Hillman about that whole sense of work as spiritual practice and utilizing the gifts that you're given. And I think that Cornell and myself, we've been given powerful minds. And again, I think our glory has to always remain with the work itself. I feel so honored to be on this show today and to hear so many different voices from so many different parts of the nation talk not about me and where I work or how much money I make, but about how they have dealt with the work and the impact that it's had on their lives, because that's the real moment of glory, in the work itself and what it does.
Well, let's continue then. Carborough, North Carolina, you're next.
Yes, I'd like to thank you, Bell Hooks, for my re-education. I'm a gay black male, and I started reading your stuff about 10 years ago, and I read Breaking Bread. And in Breaking Bread, you and Cornel West talk about this possible black identity, this black person that could possibly come along, you know, having not had a perfect life and still transcend all of that and be able to speak for himself and empower themselves, and et cetera. And I appreciate that. My point is that growing up an African-American male, I've maybe engaged in activity was not, quote-unquote, morally correct. Okay? Now I'm at a point in my life in which, you know, I've transcended all of that, but I'm not able to leave that behind. I'm not able to leave that behind, more so because of white supremacy, who constantly brings that up about my past. And where I'm not able to defend myself, I'm not able to say, well, what about racism, et cetera, its impact on my life? It becomes closure for white America, but mine remains open.
Well, you know, partially I think that we have to think holistically. I mean, anybody who only thinks about race in relationship to their life is missing an aspect, whether you're a white person who only thinks about race. We are combinations of things. And one of the things I say in Rock My Soul, Black People and Self-Esteem, is that part of the danger of life for Black Americans right now is, in a sense, the whole culture encourages us to only think about race or to only focus on race. And while race is significant, important, and racism is real, we have to think about our self-actualization and self-realization holistically. We have to talk about all the other things that may have impacted on you becoming who you are as a gay Black male in this nation. We have to be willing to talk about our families of origin and do the work of healing there. I mean, Marlon Riggs, the incredible Black gay male intellectual filmmaker, and I used to argue all the time, and one of the things that Marlon used to love to say, you know, Black men loving Black men is the Revolutionary Act. And I used to say, Marlon, Black men dealing with their childhoods is the Revolutionary Act, because often we have to go back to our families of origin to find the space of healing, to find where we begin to have imprints that took us away from self-actualization. Because any Black child or child of color in this nation that has healthy self-esteem will know how to deal with racism. And any white child in our nation that is taught to be loving is not going to be a racist. I have never met a loving white person who is a racist, because love continually challenges us and calls us to deal with anything that stands in our way of connecting with other people.
Minneapolis.
Yes.
Go ahead, ma'am.
Hello, Bell Hooks. My name is Edith Washington, and I am an African-American 42-year-old single parent. And my mother is in Gary, Indiana, that's where I'm from, and she told me you were on, and I ran through the house to get to the TV to turn you on and listen to you. You are one of my mentors, and I want to also say that life has been a roller coaster. I grew up in Gary, Indiana in the projects. I became a drug and alcohol user when I was 9 or 10. I was sexually abused from the age of 5 on. I became chemically dependent on heroin, went to jail 9 times, went to prison. And I ended up in Minnesota from an abusive relationship. And in the 11 years that I've been here, my life has been transformed. The stereotypical views of a person such as myself are untrue. I became the first African-American female licensed electrician in the state of Minnesota.
Well, that's really wonderful. I'm just cutting you off for a minute to ask you, did you have a question, or did you want to tell me more, just so I would be able to address it?
Yes.
I didn't want you to get cut off.
I want to say a little more.
Okay.
The reason why I'm calling is because I speak a lot in colleges, universities, elementary schools, you name it. I've probably spoken there around this Twin Cities. I got a vision that I was supposed to do something more profound with my life, and I started writing. I am now writing the first of a series of books on my life. Right now, it's in my childhood, and I have approximately 170 pages. And I don't know where I have this gift from. I just know that I do. And as I read it to people, they say the same thing. Even my parents say the same thing, both of them.
Thank you. Any advice for her?
Well, first of all, I think that you showed courageously to our audience that part of healing is about being able to speak our truths and to connect those truths to practices of healing. You talked about writing as a force of healing and as a gift that's helping you become more fully who you are. So I can only encourage you to go forward, and that if you want to publish your work, to think about self-publishing, or to think about sending it to publishers of books that are the kind of books you like to read, that are doing what you want to do. I tried to encourage you to get to the question because we only have so much time. So I hope that that was one of your questions, what you could do. If you want to publish books, it's important to look at the publishers who do the kind of books that you're interested in getting published.
Now, you look at some authors and they've written all of their books under one label. You look at your books and you have Perennial, Al Books, South End Press, William Morrow, now your new book coming out in Simon & Schuster. How has that evolved?
Well, first of all, I began my writing life in the world of the independent press, where there's not, I didn't get royalties. up front, a world of the struggling independent press, and I continue to publish Feminist Theory from Feminism is for Everybody was published with South End Press. So I feel a deep loyalty to the independent press in America. So while I've gone on to sell books for more money to more corporate presses, which we do that because corporate presses have greater distribution. So you'll have more readers as a consequence of publishing often with a bigger press. But part of what I've tried to do is balance who I publish with. My faithful publishers of many of those books that you have on the table are Routledge, which is a more academic-oriented press. They did Teaching to Transgress, Outlaw Culture, Where We Stand. So I think I've been fortunate. I've written about this, that I like to work with people I love. Sometimes my change of presses has had to do with, going to work with different people that I've worked with before. Sometimes, unfortunately, as in the case of William Morrow, who bought all the Love books, they were then sold to a larger company. So, in a sense, I ended up at HarperCollins, not because I'd gone there. In fact, I had hoped that William Morrow would be my publisher for the rest of my writing life. And so, as you know, the publishing industry is in great states of flux, but I feel very lucky as a writer. I love the people that I work with on my children's books. And it's a constant, for me, sense of where do you want to place your work in terms of maximizing the number of people who have access to it, working with people like the Disney Hyperion crew for B-Boy Buzz, so that when I say, I'm uncomfortable with the fact that we don't have any images of the boys in this book being still reading. They say, okay, let's go back to the drawing board, even if that's going to cost money. And of course, the more money a company has, the more they're able to do that. But it's also the collaboration with workers, and and that's a really, really good thing. And so I've been very interested in encouraging more Black people to become a part of publishing, so that, my editor for the Love books was a young Black woman. My editor of Ed Henry Holt for Bone Black and for Killing Rage, so that there's a whole sense of moving to and around as a way of trying to create an environment that brings more Black people into the pragmatic parts of publishing.
And for Rock My Soul, who's your editor?
Rock My Soul was bought by the young Black woman who has herself matured, Tracy Sherrod, who's one of the leading lights in Black women editors, but then she decided to go on. So I feel a little sad because I went hoping to work with her and she's gone, but she's still a part of my life and a part of my writing evaluation. And so, that's an up and down thing. She's going to complete her work on Rock My Soul, Black People and Self-Esteem, but I have now a new editor that I'm getting to know, Malaika, at Simon & Schuster.
Next call, Montgomery Village, Maryland.
Good afternoon, Ms. Bell Hooks. My name is Stacy, and I've recently relocated from California, and I just want to thank you for sharing your spirit this morning, watching you. And I actually didn't understand the whole point of book TV, but now that has given me time to really interact with you as one of my favorite authors, and also begin a dialogue with my daughter about my 12-year-old daughter about my politics and my feminism. I am really, really grateful. I was exposed to your work at UC Berkeley working on my undergraduate degree on socialization, deviance, and the role of women. And I actually took a class with Trinity Minha and remember some very heated discussions in that class because I am quite opinionated about my views. And what I want you to do right now is tell me those 6 characteristics of love one time, because I'm writing down my notes.
Okay. You can find them in any one of the Love books, but they are care, commitment, knowledge, responsibility, respect, and trust. And let me say that I was teasing Connie earlier behind the scenes here and saying to her, so many people were coming up to me and saying, why haven't you been on book TV? And so I was tickled to death when I was finally called, because I said, gosh, I guess this energy was just created out there in the universe that said I needed to be here with Connie discussing my work.
Here's an email from Jeffrey Jones in Shreveport, Louisiana, and I just want to read the first part of it. He says something, he disagrees with something you said. Also, we'll let you clarify it, or argue it back. While I am a progressive man for almost every facet of modern feminism, I must take umbrage at one of your comments today. You commented that one of the goals of feminism is to change men so that they don't have to wait until they are near death to be in a state that you'd prefer.
No, I actually didn't say a state I would prefer. I said in a state of emotional awareness and emotional connection. And any man who's a student of patriarchy knows that part of what patriarchy often teaches males from boyhood on is not to feel. That's why I quoted Terrence Real's book, How Can I Get Through to You? Because he so brilliantly talks about how men are encouraged to shut down their feelings. So that's what I was talking about, that many men are not allowed to get in touch with their feelings, to cry, to touch, to express emotions until they are old, or till they've had their triple bypass or their heart attack, where they no longer feel they have to ally themselves with that patriarchal masculinity that says, don't feel. And John Bradshaw, who's another one of my popular heroes, says, you know, what you can't feel, you can't heal. And I think that, you know, again, in his book, Creating Love, he talks about patriarchy helping many men to stay closed down and shut. So that's what I was saying, that a truly visionary feminism will open up that space where men can feel and be heroic about their feelings and not be shamed. Because we often shame men, males and females shame males for showing their feelings. We shame the little boy who cries, and we often shame the male who cries.
Does feminism equal political liberalism?
Yes, absolutely. You cannot have a feminist movement that aims to change the nature of how all of us live. That's a radical movement. It's not just a reform movement. A reform movement is aimed at just changing. For example, feminist reformism was aimed at equal rights for equal pay. That's a reform gesture. A more radical version of feminism would say, we need to change the nature of work. People need to work fewer hours so they have more time to read, so men have more time to spend with their families. People need to job share. I mean, we have the incredible work of the sociologist Arlie Hochschild when she talks about the second shift and how women are now doing 2 jobs, working full-time outside the home and doing the work inside the home, and how this is creating a lot of stress in the home environment. And so we need men and women both to have more time to create homes, to create love, and that's a much more radical vision.
Seattle, Washington, go ahead.
Hi, I'm recording this for Mother's Day, so I just wanted to say thank you. But my question is, I remember sort of a call that you had on black women to become art critics, and I was just wondering if you had an update on the progress of that call. Thank you.
Well, you know, I haven't seen more black women becoming art critics. And, you know, when I first wrote about this, I was talking about there are forms of writing that are not really conducive to making money. And art criticism is one of them. You know, when I gave the lead talk at the Harlem Book Fair last year, one of the things I said is there are books we need to have written about African American life and experience and thought that may not make a lot of money. That means that we've got to build into our sense of culture, what does it mean to do something that isn't necessarily about making money? You know, there are some books I write, Connie, I make a lot of money. And there are other books that I don't make a lot of money and I don't sell them for a lot of money. And I feel really blessed to have the option. But certainly we won't see more black people and black females writing certain kinds of books until we can have that sense that, as Cornell is always talking about, of non-market values, of people feeling that it's important to do something whether you're going to make a lot of money or not. And this is a hard thing in our culture right now for any group.
Is there a misconception that successful African American authors make their success or have a tendency to write about African American issues, or an African American biography, or an African American in history? Is it a misconception, is my guess?
I think that what we have to remember is often what people write is driven by what the marketplace will buy. So much of what you see African American people writing, it's not necessarily what they have chosen to write, but what the market mutually tells them would be good. For example, when a Bell Hooks book has a good book on teaching, by the way, where blackness doesn't play much in teaching to transgress, the market then wants me to write another book about teaching. I mean, because the market reproduces that which sells. So, for example, when the Terry McMillan books were an enormous economic success, or the Elin Harris books, for those of you who don't know him, he's a black gay man who writes popular fiction, then there's more of that comes into being. It's just like, for example, I'll tell you, since I talked about loving fashion, I've always been a collector of turquoise jewelry. But right now, if you open up fashion magazines, you see lots of turquoise jewelry. All of a sudden, you go into stores and you see lots of turquoise jewelry. That's how the market reproduces a product and makes people desire it and then gives them it. The same happens in the world of books. Now, for example, All About Love, without my picture on the cover, or Communion, you could read those two books and you could never know that I'm an African-American woman. But the publishers did raise the question with me of, will there be an audience for this book? Because people do often read along racial lines. You know, Irish Americans will choose Irish American writers or what have you. And though, to me, the point is to not get stuck. I love the fact that I can write a book with African American characters, let's say the children's book. But I look forward to writing a book where there may be no African American characters. I mean, the thing is that right now we have such a market-driven publishing world. And what has proven to sell is memoirs, you know, popular fiction more so. I mean, Toni Morrison, for example, and I write about this in Remembered Rapture, winning the Pulitzer Prize and hasn't led to there being a huge body of serious fiction being written by first-time black writers, because there's not a lot of money in serious fiction. Toni Morrison did not make a lot of money when she first started writing her serious fiction. The Sula, I mean, like right now, for example, Sula is on the New York Times bestseller list. It was not on the bestseller list when it came out years ago. So I think that people have to recognize that we both have to respond to the marketplace and resist. I love to read the books that are on the big list because I like to be a part of what everyone else in America is reading. At the same time, I know that we need books that may never appear on these lists that may need to be read. For example, Gary Zukav's book, Seat of the Soul, when it first came out, it was kind of a flop. But then when it was reissued after the Thomas More books, lots of people bought it. I don't think it was a very exciting book, but I think his other book, The Heart of the Soul, is fantastic. But many people may not even know much about The Heart of the Soul because it may not get the attention in the newspapers, et cetera, et cetera.
Next call, Jackson, Mississippi.
Hi, actually I'm from Jackson, Michigan.
Michigan, I'm sorry.
That's okay. I'm a biracial woman, and I have a sister who has two girls who have a biracial father and a nephew who has an African-American father, and they're treated quite differently. My nephew has been diagnosed with attention deficit hyperactivity disorder, but he also appears to have an undiagnosed learning disorder. We just celebrated his 14th birthday yesterday, and he had a very difficult time even reading his birthday cards. But his mother is quite defensive regarding getting him a tutor or any kind of help. He's very intelligent. He's had a dedicated interest in animals since he was a toddler, and he wants to be a zoologist. And my concern is that regarding his education and his self-esteem, this is clearly a major obstacle to both of those, and yet he has all of the gifts necessary to succeed. And I was wondering, Bell Hooks, if you might give me any advice regarding how I might turn my sister around in terms of getting him help.
Thanks. Can I just add to that an email thought that came in that's somewhat parallel to that from Christy Pryor in Hopkinsville, Kentucky, from your hometown. I've been working as a substitute teacher in the public schools, and it seems all too often that young black males and other minorities are dismissed as behavioral problems in the classroom, marginalizing them. What are your thoughts on public education and making it a place of opportunity and learning for all students?
Well, let's begin by saying that most gifted children of any race tend to go against the grain in their behavior and may be seen as problematic. But if you have a gifted child from a privileged class background, they may go to a school where the teacher understands what it is to be a gifted child. The poorer you are, the more you have anything against you, people won't see it, oh, he's particularly gifted. They'll say, he's dumb, he's a problem. You know, my own goddaughter, when she was in grade school, she's enormously gifted, but she was told that she was dumb because she had difficulty reading. But in fact, the books she was trying to read were so beneath her level of understanding. And I think that one thing you can do in this child's life is be an affirming presence. Because again and again today, we've heard people talk about how they want to change someone. It's hard to approach anything with the idea that you're going to change someone else. Because really, the only person we really have the power to change is ourselves, unless other people want to be changed by us. But what you can do is be the person who offers the positive input. Be the person who says, by the way, here's someone you can talk to about this with your child. You know, when my friend came home and said, the teacher says, you know, my goddaughter is dumb, I said, that's ridiculous. You know, but she's not doing well on these tests. I said, come on, they're not the judge of everything. So having that alternative view can be crucial to turning a child's life around. It's what psychoanalyst Alice Miller called an enlightened witness. Someone who's there, and particularly for black boys, there's often no one there to tap into that smartness, that creativity, to channel it in the right direction. And you can be that witness to any child, anyone out there, and that can be the life-saving mechanism. Even if parents are not willing to open up, or you can still have that witness. I talk about that in Bone Black when I talk about my grandfather being a witness to my life and telling me that one day that all the broken bits and pieces of my heart would be healed and I would be whole. And just having that witness was crucial to my survival and my coming to that place of self-love.
You're watching Book TV's In-Depth program. It's our monthly series where we sit down with an author and talk about their complete body of work, not just their latest work. And this month, our guest is Bell Hooks. She has over 20 books, and we're going to be showing, before we go, your newest book coming out one more time. But let's try to get a couple more calls in before we leave. Bowie, Maryland.
Hello, Belle. How are you?
Fine.
Good. I live in Bowie, Maryland, as she said, and I'm a single mother of an African-American boy who had to look for 3 schools before I found a school that could provide the nurture and the affirmation that has allowed him to thrive. So I understand what the previous caller was talking about. The second thing, and I have 3 things I want to say. The second thing is I want to say to you how much I enjoyed Breaking Bread, particularly the piece where you talked about how when you would say your pieces in church and the deaconesses would so affirm everything that you said, and I remembered how much an important part of that was to my life, and it changed my approach in dealing with children, and I commit myself to being affirming of all children. But can you kind of extend what you were talking about, because I have noticed this feminization, forgive that use of the word, I know you may bristle to it, of the classroom that affects black boys disproportionately, but all young male boys. It seems that there is a hostile environment towards the energy of boys in classrooms that really does marginalize them.
Well, I think all of the theorists that have been writing about the education of boys point out that the way we structure classrooms where people have to be still may not be conducive to learning for either boys or girls or anyone who's very active. I want to just say that you gave all our callers an important practice that they can do to tend to the hearts and souls of their children, particularly black boys, which is if they're in a school where they're having lots of problems, that you seek for the right environment for them, the right learning environment for them, and that you don't give up. But you know, I think that we have to talk about, when we talk about the feminization, I think that this is a misunderstanding, because you know, we want boys often to be disciplined, and the fact is children can learn discipline in Montessori schools. People don't need rigid modes of behavior. I'm always telling audiences that I never hear anyone say, we need more Montessori schools for black boys. But I do think we need more alternative schools for children in general that adapt the learning environment to the needs of the child. And one of the difficulties for poor people is the public school system is often one where the child must adapt to a crowded environment where there is one model and keep everybody in line, and often black males fall through the cracks of such an environment.
We just have a minute left. A couple questions. Are you politically active?
I'm totally politically active in the sense of calling for a complete challenge and changing of the culture that we live in, working to end domination in all its form. We haven't talked a lot about homophobia, but I think that's crucial to end in our society.
What about through the government?
Through the traditional governments.
Yes.
I try to work on behalf of things that I feel are vital, but I get really annoyed, as in the case of the last election, when, as Michael Moore tells us in Stupid White Men, when, you know, Ralph Nader could have encouraged everyone to vote for Gore and he did not. So, but I do feel primarily that ours is a government of the ruling classes, so I tend to encourage more alternative notions of government and self-responsibility, democratic socialism, because I think that if we work more within communities, people can bring more change.
Emily Dickinson.
Emily Dickinson, my girl.
What does she mean to you?
Emily Dickinson, you know, means so much to me because she was one of the first writers that brought together for me that sense of being a bit odd, being a reader, being unworldly, because I think that I was an unworldly child. I was very sheltered in a religious home environment, and Emily Dickinson was my light, telling me that I could be a thinker and a writer. You know, when I read her "This is my letter to the world that never wrote to me," the sense of invitation in her work, and I continue to, you know, be an Emily Dickinson reader in my life today, to work with the artist Ronnie Horn, who I met, who's a white woman artist, but who also had Emily Dickinson as her mentor, and we're born on the same day. So Emily Dickinson is a constant thread. Poetry, you know, is important. I read poetry as much as I can. I recite it. It was recited in my home. I think it's important for children especially to make poetry a part of daily life.
We are out of time. It's been a fast 3 hours. Thank you very much for joining us. This is her newest book coming out when?
In a few months, too. Okay. Rock My Soul.
Rock My Soul, Black People and Self-Esteem. Our guest for the past 3 hours, Bell Hooks on In Depth. Thank you very much.
It's been fun to be here, and I just feel grateful to have so many readers from so many different places.
You've been watching In Depth with Bell Hooks. If you missed any portion of this 3-hour interview, you can see this program again at 5 p.m. Eastern and later tonight at midnight.